Corinth's story begins long before it became one of the great powers of the ancient Greek world. Its origins sit at the meeting point between myth and geography, where early settlement patterns, strategic advantages, and storytelling traditions created the foundations of a city that would shape Mediterranean history for many centuries. To understand how Corinth rose to prominence, we must begin with the land itself. The myths that early inhabitants told about that land, and the ways geography shaped human choices from the earliest times. Corinth stands on the narrow isthmus that links mainland Greece with the Peloponnese. This land bridge is barely a few miles wide, and since antiquity, it has offered both a challenge and an opportunity. On one side lies the Corinthian Gulf, opening westward towards central Greece and the wider Mediterranean. On the other side spreads the Saronic Gulf, pointing eastward toward Athens and the Aegean Sea. Long before written records, people would have noticed that controlling this narrow region meant controlling movement between entire regions. Herdsmen, traders, travelers, and armies all passed through this bottleneck. Geography alone ensured that anyone who settled here would eventually be drawn into the broader flow of Greek history. Two natural harbors gave early Corinth a rare advantage. To the northwest sat Lycaeum, opening into the Corinthian Gulf. To the southeast sat Centri, providing access to the Saronic Gulf. These were not accidental features. They were strategic assets that helped Corinth develop into a maritime and commercial center. Long before the city became powerful enough to build fleets or sponsor colonies, these twin ports connected it to distant communities. Early trade routes often sprang from convenience as much as ambition. And for people living near the isthmus, trading by sea was often simpler than traveling by land. The harbors linked settlers to the wider world, encouraging contact, exchange, and innovation. Above the isthmus rose the Acrocorinth, a massive rocky hill that dominated the landscape. This natural fortress would later become one of the most important defensive positions in Greece. But even in the early periods, it provided security and a natural gathering point for communities. Many ancient Greek cities formed around high ground, and Corinth's elevated citadel offered protection from invasion and a symbolic center of the growing settlement. Early inhabitants built shrines and fortifications here, tying religion, defense, and local identity together in one place. As with many Greek cities, myth was woven into this early development. Myths did not emerge as entertainment alone. They helped communities explain their world, claim territory, and define values. One of Corinth's earliest legendary rulers was Sisyphus, a figure known throughout Greek storytelling for his cunning and defiance. According to myth, Sisyphus founded the city and gave it its earliest structure. His story, marked by his eternal punishment of rolling a stone uphill, reflected themes of persistence and human struggle. To later Corinthians, having Sisyphus as a mythical founder added a certain bold identity to their city's character. Another mythic figure tied to Corinth is Corinthos, sometimes described as the city's namesake. In some traditions, he was considered a descendant of Helios, the sun god. This connection was meaningful in a landscape where sunlight, sea, and geography shaped everyday life. Myths that linked Corinth to divine or heroic lineages allowed the community to present itself not only as strategically located, but also as culturally legitimate and spiritually significant in the Greek world. Corinth's early religious life also revolved around important deities, especially Poseidon. As the god of the sea and earthquakes, Poseidon held special relevance for a city that relied on maritime routes and stood in a region prone to seismic activity. The myth of Poseidon contesting control of various lands appears in many Greek regions. But in Corinth, it carried particular weight. Controlling both the sea and the land's stability, Poseidon represented forces that shaped everyday survival. Early shrines, rituals, and festivals in his honor strengthened communal identity and acknowledged the natural forces that influenced Corinthian life. Archaeologists trace the earliest settlement in the Corinth area to the Neolithic Age. But it was during the early Bronze Age that more recognizable communities began taking shape. By the early first millennium BCE, a pattern of settlement emerged that would eventually develop into the Corinth we recognize from later history. Groups settled near fertile plains around the isthmus, taking advantage of rich agricultural land. Grain, olives, and grapes could be grown with relative ease, supporting population growth and encouraging trade in food products. As communities expanded, they naturally gravitated toward defensible high ground, leading to early habitation on and around the Acrocorinth. Over time, these loosely connected settlements began to unite into a single political and social community. The cause and effect relationship between geography and human behavior becomes clear here. Because the isthmus was a crossroads, early inhabitants were exposed to influences from many regions. Ideas, technologies, and customs from Western Greece, Central Greece, and the Peloponnese all flowed into the area. These interactions accelerated the development of skilled pottery and metalwork, which would soon become hallmarks of Corinthian craftsmanship. With improved craft production came trade, and with trade came greater wealth and complexity. During the early Iron Age, Corinthian pottery became increasingly distinctive. While other Greek regions also developed notable ceramic styles, Corinth's early adoption of fine pottery production helped it establish strong economic ties across the Greek world. Pottery was not merely a local craft, it was an export that carried Corinthian identity far beyond the isthmus. As traders moved between harbors, Corinthian wares traveled with them, spreading the city's reputation and creating networks of exchange that would grow over the following centuries. The combination of fertile land, strategic harbors, and a commanding citadel contributed to the emergence of an early aristocracy. Families that controlled land, trade routes, or religious responsibilities gained influence. These aristocratic groups provided leadership, organized communal defense, and managed relationships with neighboring regions. The development of political structures was gradual, shaped by internal dynamics and external pressures. But the geographic position of Corinth meant that disputes over control were not purely local matters. They affected trade, alliances, and interactions with powerful neighbors such as Megara, Argos, and later Athens. The isthmus did not simply connect regions. It also offered Corinth a chance to control and profit from movement. Even in the early periods, travelers moving between northern and southern Greece often passed through this narrow land. Over time, this gave Corinth the ability to regulate or benefit from land traffic, especially as its political power grew. In later centuries, the famous diolkos, a paved trackway for hauling ships across the isthmus, would further demonstrate how geography empowered Corinth. But even before such engineering feats, people recognized that whoever held the isthmus held influence over the Greek mainland. By the early stages of the first millennium BCE, the region that would become Corinth was experiencing a quiet but steady transformation. The land had already shaped the lives of the people who lived there, and the myths of Sisyphus and Corinthos had helped define a cultural identity rooted in both struggle and divine connection. But mythology alone could not explain the rise of Corinth into a structured, influential city-state. This next period is defined by real developments in settlement patterns, craftsmanship, agriculture, social structures, and expanding regional interaction. These forces gradually turned Corinth from a scattered community into a unified polis, capable of shaping events far beyond the isthmus. Archaeological evidence suggests that after the Mycenaean collapse, Many Greek regions entered a long phase often referred to as the Greek Dark Age. During this time, population levels fell, political systems weakened, and long-distance networks shrank. Yet even during these challenging centuries, the Corinthian region was not stagnant. Small settlements persisted around the fertile plains and along the routes that crossed the isthmus. These communities did not yet function as a single political unit, but they began to share cultural practices, burial customs, and localized trade patterns. Over time, these shared practices created the foundation upon which a larger civic identity would form. One important element in Corinth's early development was its advantageous environment. The lands surrounding the lower slopes of the Acrocorinth were well suited for agriculture. Grains, olives, and grapes, three staples of the ancient Mediterranean world, grew reliably here. Farmers developed techniques that allowed them to manage the rocky terrain, and nearby springs made irrigation more stable than in many other Greek regions. Because food production was dependable, population levels slowly increased. This growth created the conditions for greater social complexity. As more families settled in the same region, they required new forms of leadership, shared rituals, and coordinated systems for managing land and resources. Another key development was the rise of skilled craftsmanship. During the early Iron Age, Corinth's artisans began refining pottery production to a degree that set them apart from many Greek neighbors. This was not repetition of the later fame of Corinthian pottery, but rather the early stages of a craft tradition that would later flourish. These artisans experimented with shapes, decorative patterns, and firing techniques. They produced vessels for storage, cooking, ritual use, and trade. Even before Corinth became a major economic force, the quality and consistency of its pottery helped the community build connections with nearby settlements. Craft production often works hand in hand with trade, and Corinth was no exception. Traders from the region ventured into neighboring territories, carrying goods that reflected the skill of their community. In exchange, they returned with foreign objects, new ideas, and cultural influences from places including Attica, Argolis, and central Greece. Such exchanges were modest by later standards, but they played a crucial role in shaping Corinthian identity. Every borrowed technique, traded artifact, or observed custom contributed to a growing sense that the Corinthian region was part of a broader world with which it needed to keep pace. During these centuries, burial practices also changed, providing clues about social structure. Early graves reveal increasing variation in the wealth of items buried with the dead. Some graves held only simple pottery, while others contained jewelry, bronze objects, or more elaborate offerings. Though we cannot know the exact roles these individuals held, the presence of unequal grave goods suggests that social distinctions were emerging. Some families clearly held more resources or influence than others. This growing hierarchy laid the groundwork for the political structures that would later define the city-state. As communities expanded, the Acrocorinth became a focal point for communal activity. The high plateau offered not only safety, but also a neutral place where members of different settlements could gather. Shrines dedicated to local deities appeared, reinforcing the idea that certain rituals and beliefs united the region. Religious gatherings allowed people to negotiate shared identities. When groups worshiped the same gods in the same places, they strengthened alliances and encouraged cooperation. Over time, these ritual spaces helped merge separate settlements into a more cohesive whole. While religion unified the region, nearby threats encouraged cooperation as well. The isthmus was a strategic corridor, and groups living here would have been aware of rivals from Megara, Argos, or inland territories. Even if large-scale warfare was rare during this early period, small skirmishes or disputes over land and access routes were likely. Communities that learned to defend themselves collectively gained an advantage over those that remained isolated. This process fostered the kind of collaboration and organization that gradually resembles the structure of a city-state. Another influence on Corinth's development was the gradual re-emergence of long-distance connections in the wider Greek world. As Greece recovered from the disruptions of the earlier centuries, trade routes revived and artistic influences spread. Metalwork from the Near East reached Greek shores, carrying patterns and techniques that local artisans adapted. Pottery styles from Attica and eastern Greece also circulated widely. Corinthian craftsmen learned from these trends while adding their own innovations. This ability to adapt foreign influences to local tastes would become one of Corinth's defining strengths in the centuries ahead. Even the simplest details of daily life contributed to Corinth's transformation. Houses became more permanent, moving from temporary wooden structures to more durable foundations. Storage facilities for grain and oil improved, allowing families to build surpluses. Roads between settlements became more defined as travelers and traders walked the same paths repeatedly. A community that moves goods efficiently is more likely to develop markets, and while Corinth's early markets were small, they provided a setting where people traded, debated, shared news, and formed new social bonds. As economic activity increased, certain families began to consolidate authority. These leaders coordinated the use of land, organized religious festivals, and defended the community when necessary. While we cannot identify specific individuals from this early period, the emergence of such leadership is a common pattern in the evolution of Greek polis. These early elites would later develop into the aristocratic families who played influential roles in Corinth's political life. Their power grew not through sudden conquest, but through steady control of resources, religious positions, and communal responsibilities. A significant cause and effect cycle emerges here. Agricultural success led to population growth. Population growth created a need for organization. Organization encouraged craft specialization and trade. Trade increased wealth and exposure to foreign influence. Wealth and influence strengthened the position of emerging leaders. Leaders coordinated community life, which encouraged further unification. Through this cycle, Corinth evolved from isolated settlements into a structured community with shared interests and increasingly complex governance. As the region unified, the idea of a central town began to take shape. While earlier settlements were scattered across the landscape, people gradually clustered around the lower slopes of the Acrocorinth. This shift marked the true beginning of Corinth as an urban center. The placement made sense. The hill offered protection, the plains provided food, and the harbors nearby ensured access to trade. From this point forward, Corinth would grow not merely as a region, but as a city that spoke with one voice in regional affairs. Archaeological remains from this early period also include evidence of specialized workshops. These spaces, dedicated to pottery production or metalworking, indicate a growing division of labor. When individuals focused solely on one craft, they could improve their skills, produce surplus goods, and contribute more effectively to the economy. This specialization is a key marker of urban development. A true city-state relies on interdependent roles, and these early workshops show Corinth moving toward that model. As Corinth entered the early stages of becoming a unified polis, the growing community required stronger leadership and more organized political structures. Out of this need emerged one of the earliest and most influential ruling families in Greek history, the Bacchiads. Their rise marked a major turning point for Corinth, shaping its political identity, controlling its economy, and guiding its relationship with neighboring regions. This era did not begin with sudden conquest or dramatic revolution. Instead, it unfolded gradually, as a prominent lineage solidified its authority and established a model of oligarchic rule that would dominate Corinth for many generations. The Bacchiads trace their lineage back to a legendary ancestor named Bacchus, a figure believed to have ruled Corinth during the transition from monarchy to oligarchy. While the historical details of Bacchus himself remain unclear, his name carried considerable prestige, and his descendants used this connection to justify their authority. In ancient Greece, claims of noble descent were powerful political tools. They provided a divine or heroic origin story that set one family apart from the rest. In Corinth, the Bacchiads successfully presented themselves as natural leaders, and over time they transformed this perception into formal political control. The structure of the Bacchiad oligarchy rested on the principle that only members of this extended family could hold the highest political offices. Instead of a single monarch ruling Corinth, power was distributed among multiple relatives, all of whom belonged to the same aristocratic lineage. The Bacchiads limited political participation so tightly that ordinary citizens, farmers, craftsmen, sailors, and traders had little influence over state decisions. Even other non-Bacchiad aristocrats found themselves excluded from leadership. The system concentrated authority in the hands of a small, tightly knit ruling class. And this exclusivity became one of the defining features of Corinthian politics during this era. This political structure created stability, but it also produced tension. The Bacchiads maintained unity through strict marriage rules, allowing only endogamous unions within their clan. By marrying among themselves, they preserved property, influence, and lineage purity. This practice strengthened their cohesion, but prevented alliances with other powerful families. In several Greek cities, strategic marriages helped form coalitions or resolve disputes. In Corinth, the Bacchiads' refusal to marry outside their clan sometimes deepened social divides. Yet their internal solidarity was also a key reason they remained in power for so long. Under Bacchiad rule, Corinth began to expand its influence more confidently. The city's political stability encouraged economic growth. Artisans continued refining pottery styles, creating wares admired throughout the Greek world. These early Corinthian potters developed distinctive geometric designs, later transitioning into the Orientalizing style, which incorporated motifs inspired by the Near East and Eastern Mediterranean. These artistic developments were not just aesthetic choices. They reflected broader contexts through trade and exchange. Corinth's growing commercial links strengthened its economy, and the Bacchiads benefited directly from this prosperity. Families that controlled trade routes or taxed harbor activities enhanced their wealth and reinforced their political dominance. Corinth's location on the isthmus made the city uniquely positioned to exert influence on regional trade. During the Bacchiad years, this advantage became more pronounced. Maritime activity increased, and the city's harbors became essential points for goods moving between the Ionian and Aegean seas. Traders from central Greece, western Greece, and the Peloponnese interacted regularly with Corinthian merchants. These encounters introduced new products, ideas, and technologies. Because the Bacchiads controlled political institutions, they also controlled how Corinth managed these exchanges. Their decisions affected which alliances were favored, which goods were welcomed, and which competitive threats were addressed diplomatically or militarily. The Bacchiads also oversaw internal developments that helped Corinth mature as a polis. As the city became wealthier, it invested in public structures and religious spaces. Temples dedicated to deities such as Apollo began to appear, emphasizing Corinth's emerging status as a center of worship and culture. Building projects reinforced civic identity, encouraging residents to see themselves not merely as members of local clans, but as citizens of a unified city. Although the Bacchiads often initiated these projects for reasons of prestige, the outcomes benefited the broader population, fostering a sense of belonging and shared purpose. One of the most significant aspects of this period was Corinth's role in early Greek colonization. While colonization would reach its peak under later rulers, the foundations of this outward movement were laid during the Bacchiad era. Population growth, combined with limited arable land, encouraged ambitious Corinthians to look beyond the isthmus. The Bacchiads supported these ventures when they enhanced Corinth's political or economic interests. Establishing settlements abroad created new markets for Corinthian goods and reduced internal pressure by providing an outlet for those seeking land or opportunity. The case of Corcyra, located on the island of Corfu, illustrates how colonization could influence Corinth's fortunes. Corinth founded this colony during the Bacchiad period, and it quickly became an important Western outpost. Interactions between the metropolis and its colony shaped both economic patterns and political relationships. Although later conflicts would arise between Corinth and Corcyra, during the Bacchiad era, the relationship helped extend Corinth's reach into the Ionian Sea. These early colonial efforts demonstrated the confidence of the ruling elite and their desire to project Corinthian influence beyond local borders. While the Bacchiad oligarchy strengthened Corinth's political and economic foundations, it also created conditions that would eventually lead to its downfall. By concentrating power within a single lineage, the Bacchiads alienated many other segments of society. As Corinth grew richer and more connected, the population became more diverse, with merchants, skilled artisans, and newly prosperous families gaining wealth and influence. These groups contributed significantly to the city's success, yet they were excluded from the mechanisms of governance. This created frustration and resentment, especially among families who believed their contributions entitled them to a greater political voice. Tension also emerged within the Bacchiad clan itself. No ruling family remains entirely united forever, and over time, internal disputes weakened their cohesion. Differences in wealth, ambition, and political strategy created factions within the clan. While these disagreements rarely erupted into open conflict during the early generations, they eroded the unity that had been essential to maintaining power. As new opportunities arose in trade, colonization, and craft production, competing interests among elite families became harder to reconcile. A turning point in the Bacchiad story came with the birth of Cypselid. His mother belonged to the Bacchiad clan, but his father did not. According to later traditions, this marriage violated the Bacchiads' strict rules of endogamy. When the clan learned of the union, they attempted to eliminate the child to preserve their purity of lineage. However, the infant Cypselid survived, thanks in part to his mother's efforts to conceal him during these tense early years. While some of the details in this account may reflect later narrative embellishment, the core tension is historically plausible. The birth of a child who belonged partially to the clan but lacked pure Bacchiad ancestry challenged their rigid system. The survival of Cypselid highlighted a key vulnerability in the Bacchiad oligarchy: their inability to adapt to changing social dynamics. As the city grew more complex, maintaining a closed ruling circle became increasingly impractical. Cypselid would later use popular dissatisfaction and internal Bacchiad divisions to overthrow the oligarchy entirely. In doing so, he would transform Corinth's political landscape and set the stage for an era of centralized rule under the Cypselid dynasty. The fall of the Bacchiad oligarchy marked one of the most decisive political shifts in early Greek history. And at the center of this transformation stood two figures whose leadership reshaped Corinth's destiny: Cypselid and his son Periander. Their rule is often referred to collectively as the Cypselid tyranny. But the word tyrant in this early Greek context should not be interpreted in its modern sense. It did not necessarily imply cruelty or illegitimacy. Instead, it described rulers who gained power outside traditional aristocratic systems and governed through personal authority rather than hereditary aristocratic privilege. The Cypselids did exactly that, and in doing so, they fundamentally altered the social, political, and economic fabric of Corinth. Cypselus rose to prominence at a moment when the Bacchiad clan was losing both unity and public support. Discontent had grown among ordinary citizens, merchants, and ambitious families excluded from political participation. Though the Bacchiads had maintained stability for many generations, their closed, inward-looking style of governance left no room for the rising commercial classes who increasingly drove Corinth's prosperity. When social and economic conditions evolve faster than political structures, change becomes inevitable. Cypselus was the figure who capitalized on this moment. His early life already signaled tension with the ruling elite. Though his mother came from the Bacchiad clan, his father did not, making him an uncomfortable presence within the aristocratic circle. The Bacchiads recognized him as a threat, not because of his personal actions, but because his very existence challenged their rigid, exclusionary system. According to later traditions, the clan attempted to eliminate him in infancy, but he survived and grew up outside their control. Even if some elements of this narrative are later dramatizations, they reflect a broader truth. Cypselus was seen as a challenger long before he became a leader. When Cypselus finally overthrew the Bacchiad oligarchy, he did so with broad support from many layers of Corinthian society. Merchants and artisans viewed him as a liberator who could dismantle the political barriers that had prevented them from gaining influence. Farmers resented the heavy dominance of the aristocratic families and hoped for fairer governance. Even some lesser nobles saw an opportunity in a political shift that weakened the old elite. Cypselus's rise was not the result of foreign invasion or violent civil war, but rather a calculated internal movement that aligned with the city's changing social structure. Once in power, Cypselus established himself not as a traditional king, but as a personal ruler supported by the people. He weakened the power of rival aristocrats by redistributing land, reducing the influence of traditional clans, and placing loyal supporters in key positions. These measures secured his authority, but also rebalanced the internal political structure of Corinth. Under the Bacchiads, power had flowed downward from a small, unified elite. Under Cypselus, it flowed outward from a single leader whose support came from a broad base of the population. One of the most important consequences of his rule was the expansion of Corinth's commercial networks. Cypselus encouraged trade in ways the Bacchiad oligarchy had not. He recognized that Corinth's strategic position at the crossroads of maritime and land routes could be leveraged to unprecedented economic gain. Traders operating from Corinth's harbors benefited from increased state support, more organized taxation, and greater political stability. Ships left Corinth carrying goods that reflected the city's growing reputation for craftsmanship, while foreign merchants brought new products and ideas that enriched local markets. Cypselus also strengthened Corinth's influence abroad through active support of colonial ventures. While the Bacchiads had overseen early colonization efforts, Cypselus expanded these initiatives with greater ambition. His policies helped establish or reinforce Corinthian presence in regions ranging from northwestern Greece to the western Mediterranean. Colonies served as trade outposts, cultural ambassadors, and extensions of Corinthian political power. They opened new markets for Corinth's goods and provided strategic positions from which the city could influence the affairs of distant communities. Although Cypselus altered Corinth's political landscape profoundly, His rule was remembered by later historians as relatively mild compared to other Greek tyrannies. He relied more on institutional restructuring than on harsh repression. By encouraging trade, founding colonies, and diminishing aristocratic dominance, he positioned Corinth for long-term growth. When he died, he left behind a stable and prosperous city, ready to enter a new phase under his son, Periander. Periander inherited not only his father's authority, but also the challenges of governing a rapidly expanding state. Unlike Cypselid, Periander is remembered as a more assertive and, at times, severe ruler. Yet he was also admired across Greece for his wisdom and administrative ability. Later writers even listed him among the 7 sages of Greece, a group associated with practical governance and moral insight. This dual legacy, admired by some, criticized by others, captures the complexity of his rule. One of Periander's major achievements was the centralization of Corinth's economic power. As trade intensified, Corinth needed infrastructure capable of handling the increasing movement of ships and goods. Periander improved harbor facilities, developed systems for managing customs revenue, and strengthened state oversight of commercial activity. These reforms helped Corinth become a dominant economic force in the Greek world. By controlling trade more effectively, the Cypselid government increased its revenue and reinforced its authority. Periander's government also invested in large public works. These projects not only demonstrated Corinth's growing wealth, but also unified the city's population around shared accomplishments. They included enhancements to temples, sanctuaries, and public spaces, each reinforcing Corinth's identity as a powerful and culturally vibrant polis. Such construction required coordination, labor, and resources, all of which highlighted the state's ability to command and organize its growing population. Perhaps the most innovative development associated with Periander's rule was the diolkos, a paved trackway that allowed ships or cargo to be hauled across the isthmus. This remarkable engineering project connected the Corinthian Gulf with the Saronic Gulf, enabling traders to bypass the long and often dangerous journey around the Peloponnese. The diolkos transformed Corinth into an essential transit point for maritime commerce. While the exact date of its construction remains debated, ancient sources often link its development to Periander. Whether he initiated or expanded the project, it reflected the Cypselid focus on maximizing Corinth's geographic advantages. Periander also strengthened Corinth's military capabilities. As trade expanded and the city's wealth increased, Corinth gained the resources to support larger armies and more effective fleets. Naval power, in particular, became a defining feature of Corinth's identity during this period. A strong navy not only protected trade routes, but also allowed the city to project influence far beyond its borders. Corinth's ships became familiar sights across the Aegean and Ionian seas, representing both commercial opportunity and political authority. Yet Periander's rule was not without controversy. His efforts to centralize power and reduce aristocratic influence created enemies among the elite. He imposed strict control over dissent, ensuring that potential rivals remained powerless. In doing so, he maintained stability, but also fostered resentment. Some ancient writers portray him as harsh, emphasizing reported conflicts with citizens or the severity of his legal measures. While these accounts may contain exaggerations, they reflect the broader reality that his governing style differed sharply from his father's more conciliatory approach. By the time Corinth emerged from the rule of Cypselid and Periander, the city had already established itself as a formidable power on the Greek mainland. Its political transformation had set the stage for rapid economic and cultural growth. But the true measure of Corinth's rising influence would be found not only within its borders. It would be expressed across the seas, in the many colonies founded by Corinthian settlers, merchants, and leaders. These colonies reshaped trade networks, expanded Corinth's reach into distant regions, and laid the groundwork for relationships that would influence Greek history for generations. Greek colonization was not a single wave of migrations, but a series of movements that unfolded over several centuries. In the early phases, many communities across Greece sought new lands for a variety of reasons. Population pressure, limited agricultural resources, political conflict, or simple ambition for trade and exploration. Corinth participated in this broader Greek pattern, but it did so with a degree of organization, purpose, and success that few other city-states matched. The Corinthian colonies became some of the most influential in the Greek world, and their origins reveal much about the city's character, its strategic thinking, and its evolving political landscape. Several factors made Corinth especially suited for overseas expansion. Its geographic position on the isthmus gave it easy access to both eastern and western seas. Merchants traveling from the Aegean to the Ionian Sea passed through Corinthian territory, exchanging news, ideas, and goods. This constant flow of information exposed Corinthian leaders to opportunities beyond the Greek mainland. At the same time, Corinth's increasing wealth from trade supported the resources required to establish new settlements abroad. Colonization was not cheap. It required ships, supplies, leaders, and settlers willing to take risks. Corinth possessed all these elements. The earliest and perhaps most significant Corinthian colony was founded on the island of Corcyra, known today as Corfu. This settlement grew rapidly, in part because of its location along important maritime routes to the western Mediterranean. While the colony maintained commercial ties with Corinth, it quickly gained its own identity and ambitions. Corcyra's natural harbors and fertile lands made it an attractive destination for settlers and a strategic outpost for Corinthian interests. However, the relationship between Corinth and Corcyra was not always harmonious. Over time, local leaders in Corcyra sought greater independence, and tensions began to develop, foreshadowing conflicts that would erupt in later centuries. But during the early colonial period, Corcyra served as a crucial stepping stone for Corinthian ventures into the west. From Corcyra, Corinth extended its reach even farther, founding one of its most famous and powerful colonies, Syracuse in Sicily. Syracuse would go on to become one of the greatest Greek cities of the Western Mediterranean, known for its wealth, monumental architecture, and political influence. Its founder, the Corinthian leader Archias, led settlers across the Ionian Sea to establish a new city on the fertile shores of Sicily. The choice of this location reflects Corinth's strategic vision. Sicily sat at the crossroads of trade routes connecting Italy, North Africa, and the Greek mainland. By establishing Syracuse, Corinth positioned itself at the heart of these networks, ensuring access to resources, markets, and alliances that would enrich the metropolis. The early growth of Syracuse demonstrates how Corinthian colonization combined economic, political, and cultural motivations. In addition to securing trade routes, Corinthians introduced their architectural styles, religious practices, and political institutions to the new settlement. As the colony expanded, it adapted these traditions to local conditions, blending Corinthian customs with influences from indigenous Sicilian peoples. This cultural fusion strengthened Syracuse's identity and helped it develop into a major regional power. Even as Syracuse matured into an independent city-state, it retained respect for its Corinthian origins, often seeking guidance or support from the mother city during key moments in its early history. Corinth's colonial movement did not stop with these early successes. Additional settlements appeared in the Adriatic, the Ionian Sea, and along the coasts of Illyria and Epirus. Some of these colonies were small trading posts, while others grew into substantial cities. Each served a specific purpose within Corinth's expanding commercial network. By positioning outposts along critical routes, Corinth could monitor the movement of goods, negotiate with local populations, and secure access to raw materials such as timber, metals, and agricultural products. These materials played vital roles in Corinth's industries, particularly shipbuilding and pottery production, both of which required steady supplies. A key feature of Corinthian colonization was its structured approach. Unlike some city-states that launched colonies in response to sudden crises, Corinth often established settlements with long-term strategy in mind. Leaders selected locations that supported maritime dominance, provided economic benefits, or offered political leverage. They appointed oikists, founders who were responsible for organizing the colony, dividing land, establishing laws, and leading settlers during the early years. These oikists were often figures of high status who carried the authority of the metropolis. Their leadership ensured that colonies maintained Corinthian customs and loyalty, at least in the initial generation. Religion also played a central role in Corinthian colonization. Before departing, settlers usually consulted oracles, especially the famous oracle at Delphi. Seeking divine approval for the journey provided legitimacy and spiritual reassurance. Additionally, Corinthian religious traditions, particularly those associated with Apollo and Poseidon, traveled with the settlers. Temples in new colonies often mirrored those in Corinth, helping maintain cultural unity across vast distances. These shared religious practices strengthened the emotional bond between settlers and the metropolis, even as colonies developed unique local traditions. Trade was the driving force behind Corinth's maritime expansion, and the colonies were essential parts of this growing network. Corinthian merchants used these settlements as staging points for trade with regions that lay beyond the direct reach of the Greek mainland. From the Adriatic coast, Corinthian traders could interact with Illyrian tribes and Italian markets. From Sicily, they could trade with North African and Iberian communities. Each colony acted as a gateway to new commercial opportunities, and the profits from these ventures flowed back to Corinth, enriching the city and reinforcing its position as a major economic power. This era of expansion also influenced Corinth's naval capabilities. As ships traveled greater distances and encountered varied conditions, Corinthian shipwrights learned to design vessels suited for long voyages, cargo transport, and rapid maneuvering. Improved ship designs contributed to Corinth's rising reputation as a center of maritime innovation. These developments would later play important roles in military conflicts, alliances, and diplomatic negotiations. A strong navy allowed Corinth to protect its trade routes, support its colonies, and influence affairs across the Greek world. Corinth's ambitions abroad were not merely economic. The colonies also served political purposes. By extending its influence into distant regions, Corinth enhanced its status among Greek city-states. Colonization demonstrated the city's wealth, organizational ability, and strategic vision. As Corinthian settlers built new communities, they carried their cultural practices and political ideals with them. This helped spread Corinth's identity, shaping the Greek presence in the Western Mediterranean in ways that resonated for centuries. However, colonization was not always peaceful or welcomed. Some indigenous populations resisted Greek settlers, leading to conflicts over land and resources. In other cases, tensions emerged between settlers and the metropolis. As colonies grew and prospered, their leaders often sought greater autonomy. The relationship between Corinth and its colonies became increasingly complex, involving negotiation, diplomacy, and sometimes open conflict. Yet even in these difficult moments, Corinth remained one of the most respected and influential colonial powers in the Greek world. As Corinth expanded its influence through colonies and maritime networks, life within the city itself grew increasingly vibrant and complex. The archaic period marked a time when Corinth was not only projecting power across the seas, but also cultivating a rich internal society built on craftsmanship, commerce, religion, and social interaction. To understand Corinth's rising importance in the Greek world, it is essential to explore how people lived, worked, worshipped, and interacted within the city during this transformative era. The structures of daily life reveal the foundations that supported economic growth, cultural innovation, and political evolution. The economic prosperity of archaic Corinth was fueled by a dynamic blend of agriculture, trade, and specialized crafts. Although colonization opened new markets overseas, the prosperity that sustained the city began at home. Farmers cultivated the fertile plains surrounding Corinth, producing grains, olives, and grapes that supported both local consumption and small-scale regional trade. These agricultural products formed the basic backbone of daily life. Households relied on them for food, oil, wine, and income through surplus sales. Agricultural success provided stability in the city's food supply and enabled other sectors of society to flourish. Yet what distinguished Corinth from many other Greek cities was its exceptional development of craft industries. Corinthian artisans became renowned for their skill, creativity, and innovation. Among their most famous achievements was the refinement of pottery production. Corinthian potters developed techniques that allowed for mass production without sacrificing quality or artistic expression. They experimented with clays, glazes, firing methods, and decorative motifs, producing pottery that became highly sought after across the Greek world and beyond. The development of the so-called Orientalizing style marked a particularly influential moment in Corinthian art. Inspired by patterns and themes from the Near East, Corinthian artisans incorporated animal figures, floral motifs, and intricate geometric designs into their work. These stylistic choices reflected the cosmopolitan environment of the city, where traders from various regions brought foreign influences to Corinth's markets. The ability of artisans to adapt and innovate made Corinthian pottery distinctive and contributed to its popularity abroad. Pottery workshops became central to the city's economy, employing skilled craftsmen, apprentices, and laborers who helped maintain production levels that supplied both local needs and international demand. Metalworking also played an important role in Corinth's craft traditions. Skilled metalworkers produced weapons, armor, tools, jewelry, and decorative objects. Their products reflected both functional and artistic excellence. Corinthian bronze goods were valued for their durability and craftsmanship, and they earned the admiration of traders and collectors throughout the Mediterranean. The demand for metal goods fostered a network of resource acquisition, with Corinth importing raw materials such as copper and tin through its expanding trade routes. These industries required coordination and support from both private workshops and public authorities, demonstrating how craft production had become integral to the city's economic structure. Everyday life in Corinth was shaped by the presence of bustling marketplaces where farmers, artisans, traders, and buyers gathered. The agora served as the city's economic and social heart. Here, people negotiated prices, exchanged news, made agreements, and participated in public gatherings. The marketplace was not a silent or orderly space. It was alive with voices, activity, and the movement of people from all walks of life. Merchants displayed pottery, textiles, oil, wine, and metal goods, while food vendors sold fruits, vegetables, and prepared meals. The constant flow of goods and information made the agora a vital institution that tied Corinth's internal economy to its external networks. Textile production formed another essential part of daily life, particularly for women. Spinning, weaving, and dyeing were common household activities, but some families operated larger workshops that produced textiles for commercial sale. Corinthian textiles gained a reputation for quality, especially those dyed with expensive colors derived from local plants or imported materials. Textile production not only supported household economies, but also offered opportunities for women to contribute to the city's prosperity. While political power remained in the hands of male citizens, the economic contributions of women through domestic and commercial production were foundational to Corinth's success. In addition to economic activities, religious life played a central role in shaping social cohesion and cultural identity. Corinth was home to numerous sanctuaries, temples, and religious festivals. The worship of deities such as Apollo, Aphrodite, and Poseidon reflected the city's spiritual diversity and its connection to both land and sea. Religious practices were intertwined with civic life, offering moments for communal gatherings and reinforcing shared values. Ritual processions, sacrifices, and celebrations filled the city with music, movement, and symbols that expressed Corinthian identity. One of the most prominent religious sites in Corinth during the archaic period was the sanctuary of Apollo. This temple complex served as a major location for worship and inspired artistic and architectural development. Pilgrims, traders, and travelers visiting Corinth often stopped at the sanctuary to offer prayers or seek guidance. The presence of such sacred places strengthened the city's reputation beyond its economic importance, making it a cultural destination as well. The cult of Aphrodite, particularly associated with the Corinth, added another dimension to Corinthian religious life. Although later periods would produce exaggerated stories about this cult, historical evidence indicates that worship of Aphrodite played a meaningful role in the city's spiritual landscape. Festivals dedicated to the goddess emphasized themes of beauty, fertility, and social harmony, reflecting the values that shaped Corinth's community life. While religion unified the city, social structure created clear distinctions among its inhabitants. Corinthian society included citizens, resident foreigners, artisans, laborers, and enslaved people. Citizens held political rights and were responsible for participating in civic duties, including military service and attending public assemblies. They often came from families rooted in land ownership or successful commercial enterprises. Resident foreigners contributed significantly to the economy, especially through trade and specialized crafts, but they lacked political rights. Many brought valuable skills from their homelands, enriching Corinthian culture with diverse influences. Artisans formed a vital middle layer of society. While they did not typically hold political authority, their economic importance granted them a degree of respect and stability. Potters, metalworkers, carpenters, and builders shaped the city's material world. Their workshops, located throughout Corinth, created the goods that filled markets and supported trade across the Mediterranean. At the base of Corinth's social structure were laborers and enslaved individuals whose work supported both households and industries. Enslaved people performed a variety of tasks, including agricultural labor, household service, and assisting in workshops. Their contributions were integral to the functioning of both domestic life and economic production. Although their lives were defined by limited freedom and legal restrictions, the work they performed played a significant role in sustaining Corinth's prosperity. Education in Corinth was influenced by the needs of its growing economy. Children of citizens often learned skills related to reading, writing, arithmetic, and music, preparing them for participation in civic life. Physical training was also important, as military service remained a duty for adult male citizens. Young men learned to fight with spear and shield, forming the foundation of Corinth's hoplite forces. This training not only prepared them for battle, but also instilled a sense of discipline, unity, and loyalty to the polis. The city's political structure continued to evolve during this time. Following the fall of the Cypselid tyranny, Corinth moved toward a more balanced system of governance. Magistrates, councils, and assemblies participated in decision-making, reflecting the growing complexity of Corinth's civic life. While aristocratic families still played influential roles, the expansion of trade and craft production created pathways for new forms of wealth and status. Economic success increasingly shaped political influence, contributing to a dynamic and sometimes contentious environment where different groups competed for authority. As Corinth entered the era of the Persian Wars, the city found itself confronting challenges and opportunities that extended far beyond commerce, craftsmanship, or internal politics. The expanding power of the Persian Empire, which had already absorbed vast territories across Western Asia and the Near East, reached the shores of the Aegean Sea and threatened the autonomy of the Greek world. For Corinth, a city accustomed to navigating complex alliances and maintaining its influence through trade and diplomacy, the Persian threat represented a new kind of challenge, one that demanded collective action, military discipline, and strategic thinking on a scale previously unseen. To understand Corinth's role in the Persian Wars, it is important to recognize the broader context that shaped Greek responses to Persian expansion. The Persian Empire, under the leadership of kings such as Darius and Xerxes, sought to consolidate control over the eastern Mediterranean. The Ionian Greeks, living along the coast of Asia Minor, found themselves under Persian rule and eventually launched a revolt. Their uprising, though ultimately unsuccessful, drew several mainland Greek cities into conflict with Persia. Among these cities was Athens, which supported the Ionian rebels and later faced a Persian invasion as a consequence. Corinth did not play a direct role in the Ionian revolt, but it closely observed the escalating tensions. Its leaders understood that if Persia established control over key Greek cities, the independence of all Greek states, including Corinth, would be threatened. Corinth's economy depended on open sea routes and stable political relationships. Persian domination of the Aegean would disrupt trade, weaken alliances, and undermine the autonomy that Greek polis regarded as essential. These concerns formed the basis of Corinth's decision to join other Greek states in resisting the Persian advance. As the threat grew, Corinth became involved in the formation of alliances aimed at defending Greece. One significant development was the gathering of representatives from various city-states to coordinate military strategy. Corinth played an active role in these early meetings, contributing both diplomatic insight and military resources. Its location at the crossroads of mainland and Peloponnesian Greece gave it strategic importance. Any Persian advance into the Peloponnese would have to pass through Corinthian territory or the surrounding regions. This geographic reality made Corinth both a frontline defender and a crucial participant in planning a collective Greek response. When the Persian forces launched their first major invasion under King Darius, the Greeks achieved a surprising victory at the Battle of Marathon. Corinth was not directly involved in this battle, but the defeat of the Persian army encouraged Greek unity and heightened awareness of the ongoing threat. Over the following years, as the Persian Empire prepared for a second and far larger invasion, Greek leaders realized that only coordinated, large-scale military action could prevent the loss of their independence. The second invasion, led by Xerxes, marked a turning point in Greek history. A massive Persian force advanced through northern Greece, while a powerful fleet sailed along the coast. In response, many Greek city-states formed what is now known as the Hellenic League, a defensive alliance that included both Athens and Sparta as leading powers, along with Corinth and several other states. Despite long-standing rivalries, the Greeks recognized that unity was essential. Corinth's participation in this coalition reflected both its strategic interests and its long-standing reputation as a capable naval power. Corinthian contributions to the war effort were significant. The city provided a fleet of well-built triremes, warships powered by rows of oarsmen, and trained sailors who were experienced in navigating the often unpredictable waters of the Greek seas. Corinth's naval tradition, strengthened over generations of trade and colonization, made it an invaluable partner in the collective Greek defense. Naval battles were expected to play a crucial role in the conflict, and Corinth's ships took part in major engagements, including the crucial Battle of Salamis. The Battle of Salamis stands as one of the most decisive naval victories in ancient history. Faced with an enormous Persian fleet, the Greek forces relied on tactical ingenuity and knowledge of local waters. Corinthian ships fought alongside those of Athens, Aegina, and other allies in the narrow straits near Salamis. The confined space prevented the larger Persian fleet from maneuvering effectively, allowing the Greek triremes to strike with precision and retreat quickly when needed. Corinthian sailors, trained through years of commercial and military experience, played an essential role in this coordinated strategy. Their efforts contributed to the destruction of a significant portion of the Persian fleet, shifting the momentum of the war in favor of the Greeks. Beyond naval contributions, Corinth also supported land-based operations. The city sent hoplites, heavily armed infantry soldiers, to join the Allied forces fighting against the Persian army. These hoplites, equipped with bronze armor, shields, and spears, fought in the phalanx formation, a disciplined and unified fighting style that allowed Greek soldiers to withstand attacks from larger forces. Corinthian hoplites participated in key battles that followed the victory at Salamis, including engagements in central Greece that eventually pushed the Persian army northward. Corinth's involvement in the Persian Wars demonstrated not only its military capabilities, but also its political maturity. The city understood that long-term independence required collaboration and shared sacrifice. While Corinth and Athens had experienced tensions in earlier years due to commercial and territorial disputes, the Persian threat encouraged them to set aside these differences. In doing so, Corinth showed an ability to adapt to shifting circumstances and pursue collective Greek interests when necessary. Another significant aspect of Corinth's role during the Persian Wars was its participation in discussions about Greek unity and post-war organization. In the aftermath of the conflict, many city-states debated how best to maintain security and manage relations among themselves. Corinth, as a city situated between major powers and deeply connected to trade networks, took part in these debates with a strong sense of its own interests. While Athens emerged from the Persian Wars with enhanced prestige, Corinth maintained a position that emphasized balance and the importance of preserving autonomy for all Greek states. The wars also had lasting effects on Corinth's economy and society. Although the conflict demanded resources, manpower, and strategic focus, Corinth managed to maintain its commercial activities. The city's harbors continued to operate, and trade resumed more strongly once Persian threats diminished. Merchants who had temporarily shifted operations returned to normal routes, bringing renewed prosperity. The stability that followed the Persian withdrawal allowed Corinth to expand its economic influence even further in the years to come. In the aftermath of the Persian Wars, the Greek world entered a period defined not by foreign invasion, but by shifting alliances, rising ambitions, and growing rivalries among the major city-states. Corinth, positioned at the crossroads of Greek commerce and politics, found itself drawn into these emerging tensions. Although the Persian threat had briefly united the Greek polis, the removal of that common enemy allowed old disputes, commercial competition, and geopolitical anxieties to resurface with renewed force. During this era, Corinth navigated the delicate balance between Athens and Sparta, each of which sought influence over the Greek world. Corinth's choices, shaped by economic interests and strategic concerns, played a significant role in the unfolding political landscape and helped lay the groundwork for the conflicts that would later erupt into open war. In the years following the defeat of the Persians, Athens rose rapidly in prestige and influence. Its naval power, strengthened during the war, became the foundation of the Delian League, an alliance originally formed to protect Greek cities from future Persian attacks. Over time, however, Athens began using the League to extend its authority across the Aegean Sea. Member states contributed ships, money, or resources, and Athens gradually transformed the League from a voluntary defensive coalition into an empire-like structure dominated by Athenian interests. This expansion allowed Athens to control trade routes, assert influence over islands and coastal cities, and build an economy increasingly dependent on maritime dominance. Corinth watched these developments with caution. As a long-standing naval and commercial power, Corinth relied on open trade routes and the freedom of independent states to conduct business. The rise of a single dominant power in the Aegean threatened these foundations. If Athens controlled the seas, it could regulate or restrict shipping lanes that Corinth depended upon for its economic well-being. Moreover, many of the regions now falling under Athenian influence overlapped with areas where Corinth had long maintained commercial interests. Athenian expansion was not simply a political shift, it posed direct economic competition. At the same time, Corinth had strong ties to Sparta, the leading power of the Peloponnesian region. Sparta had played a central role in the Persian Wars as the commander of Greek land forces. But unlike Athens, it did not seek to build a maritime empire. Its political culture emphasized conservative values, land-based power, and minimal interference in commercial affairs. These traits made Sparta a more natural partner for Corinth, whose leaders valued autonomy and stability. While the two cities were not identical in their priorities, their strategic interests often aligned, especially when facing the rapid growth of Athenian influence. However, the tension between Corinth and Athens was not solely a matter of ideology or alliance choice. Concrete disputes fueled the growing hostility. One of the most significant disputes involved the island colony of Corcyra, originally founded by Corinth, but increasingly independent and ambitious. Corcyra's strategic location in the Ionian Sea made it a powerful naval player in its own right. Conflict between Corinth and Corcyra simmered for years, eventually escalating over control of Epidamnus, a city on the Adriatic coast. When internal strife broke out in Epidamnus, Corinth supported one faction, while Corcyra backed the other. The situation intensified, drawing in larger forces and escalating tensions. Corinth sent ships and troops to assert influence over the region. Corcyra, fearing Corinthian dominance, sought assistance from Athens. The Athenians, recognizing an opportunity to challenge Corinth's influence in the west and protect their own maritime interests, agreed to support Corcyra. This decision marked a turning point. Until this moment, Athens and Corinth had experienced competition, but had avoided direct entanglement in one another's political struggles. By aligning with Corcyra against Corinth, Athens signaled its willingness to challenge Corinthian authority in areas far beyond the Aegean. Corinth viewed this as a direct threat to its security and commercial networks. The dispute over Epidamnus transformed a regional conflict into the beginning of a larger rivalry between two major Greek powers. The tension continued to escalate. When Corinth sent a fleet to confront Corcyra, it faced not only Corcyra's formidable naval forces, but also Athenian ships sent to support the island. Though the Athenians participated cautiously at first, bound by the terms of a defensive alliance, their involvement signaled a major shift in the balance of power. Corinth perceived Athens as interfering in matters traditionally considered within Corinth's sphere of influence. The conflict at sea was not decisive, but it solidified Corinth's suspicion that Athens intended to challenge Corinthian interests wherever they appeared. The quarrel over Corcyra and Epidamnus was only part of the growing list of disputes. Corinth also became involved in conflicts concerning Potidæa, a Corinthian colony that had become a member of the Athenian-led Delian League. When Potidæa sought to maintain its ties with Corinth, Athens viewed this as disloyalty and demanded concessions that angered both the colony and Corinth itself. The Corinthians saw Athenian demands as another example of aggressive expansion, while Athens regarded Corinth's involvement as interference in the affairs of its league. Each side interpreted the actions of the other as provocations. These developments reveal the deeper causes of the growing rift between Athens and Corinth. Economic rivalry played a significant role. Corinthian merchants had long been influential in Western trade, establishing networks across the Adriatic, the Italian peninsula, and beyond. Athens, with its powerful navy and expanding league, sought access to new markets and asserted control over maritime routes that sometimes overlapped with Corinth's interests. Competition for influence over colonies, trade hubs, and coastal cities created friction that diplomatic discussions could not resolve. Strategic concerns also intensified the rivalry. Corinth's leaders feared that if Athens continued to expand unchecked, it would eventually dominate the entire Greek world. Corinth's position on the isthmus gave it a unique vantage point. Its leaders observed the movement of armies and ships, the rise of alliances, and the shifting dynamics among neighboring states. They understood that Athens's growing power threatened not only Corinth, but also the broader balance within Greece. This concern pushed Corinth closer to Sparta, which had its own reservations about Athenian ambition. Sparta's political culture emphasized restraint and a reluctance to interfere beyond its immediate sphere of influence. Yet as tensions mounted, Spartan leaders recognized that Athens's rapid rise could destabilize the Peloponnese. Corinth, as a major commercial and naval power, became an influential voice in convincing Sparta that action might eventually be necessary. At various assemblies of the Peloponnesian League, a coalition led by Sparta, Corinth argued that Athens posed a serious threat and that collective measures might be required to preserve the autonomy of Greek states. These debates demonstrate how Corinth shaped the political landscape of Greece. Its speeches and diplomatic efforts influenced Spartan policy and contributed to the growing polarization between the two major power blocs. Corinth's arguments were grounded not in abstract ideology, but in concrete experience. Trade disputes, colonial conflicts, and repeated instances of Athenian interference provided tangible evidence of the danger Corinth perceived. Culturally, the rising tension also affected Corinthian society. Citizens became more aware of political developments in the wider Greek world, and public discussions reflected growing concerns about the future. Hoplites trained more diligently, anticipating the possibility of conflict. Shipyards worked to maintain and expand Corinth's fleet, recognizing that naval power might soon play a decisive role. The city's role as a strategic gateway between northern and southern Greece ensured that Corinth would be central to any major conflict. As the political tensions between Corinth and Athens intensified, the fragile balance of power that had shaped the Greek world since the Persian Wars began to unravel. Corinth's grievances, rooted in years of economic competition, colonial disputes, and bitter confrontations at sea, contributed directly to a chain of events that would ignite one of the most consequential conflicts in ancient Greek history, the Peloponnesian War. This war was not a sudden explosion of violence, but the culmination of deeply rooted anxieties, competing ambitions, and strategic calculations. Corinth's role in this unfolding drama was neither secondary nor incidental. The city's actions, alliances, and frustrations played a key part in pushing Greece toward open conflict. By the time open hostilities approached, Corinth had developed a clear view of Athens as a dangerous rival. Athens's expansion into regions traditionally influenced by Corinth particularly through support for Corcyra and intervention in Potidaea, was interpreted as deliberate encroachment. Corinthian leaders argued that if Athens continued unchecked, it would dominate not only the Aegean, but eventually all of Greece. These concerns aligned with Sparta's growing discomfort at Athenian power, and Corinth used its position within the Peloponnesian League to encourage a united response. The Peloponnesian League, led by Sparta, operated on principles of collective defense. Member states, including Corinth, gathered to discuss matters affecting the security of the Peloponnese. As Athens's influence expanded, Corinth became one of the most vocal advocates for confronting Athenian aggression. The speeches delivered by Corinthian representatives in league meetings are preserved in ancient historical accounts. These speeches emphasized Athens's alleged violations of Greek norms, its authoritarian control over the Delian League, and its interference in Western Greek affairs. Corinth argued that if Sparta failed to act, it would lose credibility as leader of the Peloponnesian alliance. Corinth's ability to persuade Sparta was rooted in both strategic reasoning and emotional weight. The Corinthian sense of injury was genuine, especially regarding the conflict with Corcyra. When Athens supported Corcyra against Corinth, it was not simply choosing sides in a colonial dispute. It was positioning itself in opposition to Corinth's established authority in the West. The ensuing naval confrontations, where Athenian ships clashed with Corinthian forces, represented the first significant military encounters between the two cities. Although these early encounters did not escalate into open war, they intensified Corinth's resolve that Athens must be checked. The conflict over Potidaea deepened the crisis. Potidaea was a Corinthian colony, but also a member of the Athenian-led alliance. When Athens demanded that Potidaea dismantle its city walls and expel Corinthian officials, the city refused. Corinth supported Potidaea's resistance, viewing Athens's demands as an attack on Corinthian identity and influence. The resulting siege of Potidaea saw Corinthian volunteers fighting alongside the defenders. This was not merely a regional dispute. It was a clear sign that Athens was willing to use force to undermine Corinth's relationships and authority. These events strengthened Corinth's appeal to Sparta. Corinthian envoys urged Spartan action, arguing that waiting would only allow Athens to grow stronger. Old rivalries between Sparta and Athens added weight to these arguments. But it was Corinth's insistence that finally pushed the Peloponnesian League toward war. The Spartan assembly eventually decided that Athens had broken the fragile peace established after the Persian Wars, and preparations began for a large-scale conflict. Corinth's role did not end with diplomacy. Once the war began, the city mobilized its resources for extended military involvement. Corinth's strengths lay in its naval power, strategic location, and experience in overseas engagements. The city's fleet, although smaller than Athens's formidable navy, was highly skilled and capable. Corinthian ships participated in numerous naval battles throughout the war, often fighting alongside Spartan or allied forces. The city's maritime experience, developed over generations of trade and colonization, proved invaluable to the Peloponnesian War effort. On land, Corinth contributed hoplite soldiers to Spartan-led campaigns. These heavily armored infantrymen fought in the phalanx formation, a disciplined and unified arrangement that had long defined Greek warfare. Corinthian hoplites participated in early campaigns in Attica and later battles in central and western Greece. Their presence added strength to Spartan operations and demonstrated Corinth's commitment to the collective cause. The early years of the Peloponnesian War were marked by a series of shifting strategies. Sparta focused primarily on invading Athenian territory by land, while Athens relied on its naval superiority to conduct coastal raids and maintain communication with its empire. Corinth found itself participating in both types of operations. Yet the city's leaders also pursued initiatives in the Western Greek world. where Corinth hoped to undermine Athenian influence by strengthening alliances with other regional powers. One such effort involved fostering ties with Syracuse, the powerful colony in Sicily that Corinth had founded generations earlier. Corinthian envoys encouraged Syracuse to resist Athenian attempts to expand influence on the island. Later in the war, when Athens launched a massive expedition to Sicily, Syracuse's eventual victory owed much to the support and advice of the Corinthians. Corinthian commanders, including the experienced general Gylippus, played key roles in organizing Syracuse's defense. The destruction of the Athenian expedition in Sicily was one of the most decisive turning points of the war, and Corinth's involvement was instrumental in shaping the outcome. Corinth's strategic efforts also extended northward toward regions such as the Corinthian Gulf and central Greece. The city worked to secure loyalty among smaller states and maintain control over key trade routes. Corinth's geographic position at the isthmus offered both strategic advantages and responsibilities. The city served as a gateway between the Peloponnese and the rest of Greece, facilitating the movement of Spartan armies and allied forces. At the same time, Corinth had to protect its own frontiers from Athenian raids or attempts to disrupt supply lines. As the war dragged on, the social and economic impact on Corinth became increasingly significant. Trade routes were disrupted by naval blockades, and merchants faced uncertainty in regions where Athenian presence threatened shipping. The strain of prolonged conflict placed pressure on artisans, farmers, and laborers, all of whom had to adapt to new economic circumstances. Yet Corinth's population demonstrated resilience, continuing to support the war effort despite the hardships. The city's strong civic identity, forged through centuries of political, commercial, and military activity, helped sustain morale. Political debates also intensified. While Corinth remained committed to the Spartan alliance, disagreements sometimes emerged about strategy. Corinth's naval orientation differed from Sparta's traditional focus on land campaigns. The Corinthians understood the importance of challenging Athens at sea, and they frequently advocated for increased naval investment and bolder maritime strategies. These differing perspectives created tension within the Peloponnesian alliance, but also pushed Sparta to develop stronger naval capabilities. In this sense, Corinth indirectly shaped Spartan policy and contributed to the evolution of the Peloponnesian War effort. The end of the Peloponnesian War left Greece profoundly changed. Athens, once the dominant naval and commercial empire of the Aegean, had been defeated. Sparta, the victorious leader of the Peloponnesian League, emerged as the new hegemon of the Greek mainland. Yet this moment of Spartan triumph did not bring stability. Instead, it revealed deep fractures within the Greek world, and Corinth, fresh from its role in defeating Athens, quickly found itself dissatisfied with the new order. Freed from the pressure of Athenian competition, Corinth began to question the growing power of its ally, Sparta. Within a short time, allies became rivals, and Corinth played a central role in forming a new coalition that would challenge Spartan dominance in what became known as the Corinthian War. The roots of this conflict lie in the political atmosphere that followed the Peloponnesian War. Sparta, having assumed leadership over Greece, sought to impose its own model of governance on defeated cities. This often meant replacing democratic systems with oligarchic councils loyal to Spartan interests. In some cases, these regimes were harsh, and their heavy-handed rule generated resentment. While Athens had been criticized for maintaining control over its alliance, many Greek states soon found that Spartan leadership could be equally restrictive and sometimes more severe. Corinth, despite having been a close ally of Sparta during the Peloponnesian War, was not immune to these concerns. During the war, Corinth's strategic goals had aligned with those of Sparta, especially in confronting Athenian expansion. But once Athens had been subdued, the reasons for cooperation weakened. Corinth's leaders began to observe a pattern in Sparta's decisions, one that increasingly favored Spartan interests above those of the Peloponnesian League. Corinth, proud of its autonomy and historically resistant to domination by any single power, came to see Sparta as a new threat to Greek freedom. One of the immediate causes of Corinth's growing dissatisfaction was Sparta's handling of affairs in Ionia and the eastern Aegean. After defeating Athens, Sparta inherited control over many former Athenian territories. The Spartan leader Lysander, celebrated for his naval victories, helped install oligarchic governments in these regions. However, these governments often ruled oppressively, sparking unrest. Corinthian merchants and sailors, who relied on stable trade routes in these areas, found their activities disrupted by political turmoil and shifting alliances. Furthermore, Corinth objected to Sparta's increasingly unilateral decision-making. During the Peloponnesian War, major strategies had been discussed collectively in league assemblies, where Corinth's voice carried substantial influence. After the war, Sparta frequently acted without consulting its allies, sending armies abroad, intervening in distant regions, and negotiating agreements that affected all of Greece. Corinth interpreted this behavior as a betrayal of the cooperative principles that had bound the Peloponnesian League together. Tensions rose sharply when Sparta launched a campaign into Asia Minor, ostensibly to support Greek cities against Persian control. While this goal aligned with traditional Greek interests, the manner in which Sparta conducted the campaign alienated Corinth and other allies. The Spartan king Agesilaus took command of operations and soon demonstrated ambitions that suggested not only the liberation of Greek cities, but also the creation of a Spartan sphere of influence in the region. Corinth feared that a stronger Sparta abroad would make the city even more dominant at home. These concerns were compounded by a series of disputes closer to the Peloponnesian heartland. Corinth found itself at odds with Sparta over matters of regional strategy, trade, and alliance obligations. In particular, Corinth increasingly viewed Spartan policies as detrimental to its own economic interests. The city's powerful merchant class worried that Spartan leadership, focused more on military campaigns than commerce, would destabilize the conditions necessary for Corinth's prosperity. Matters came to a breaking point when Sparta intervened in a local dispute between Corinth and the nearby city of Argos. Historically, the relationship between Corinth and Argos had been tense, marked by competition and occasional conflict. Yet when Sparta involved itself in the dispute, Corinth interpreted the move as overreach. Combined with growing frustration over Sparta's foreign adventures, this incident pushed Corinth toward open opposition. Many Corinthians believed that Sparta, once a necessary ally, had become a dangerous overlord. In response, Corinth joined with Athens, Thebes, and Argos in forming a new coalition aimed at counterbalancing Spartan power. This alliance, supported financially by the Persian Empire, emerged from a convergence of interests. All its members had grievances against Sparta, and Persia saw an opportunity to weaken a Greek state that had become too assertive for its liking. The involvement of Persia was not unusual in this period. Persian kings often used diplomacy and subsidies to influence Greek affairs without direct military involvement. For Corinth, aligning with Persia represented a strategic calculation rather than ideological alignment. The city had no desire to see Persia dominate Greece, but it recognized that Persian support could level the playing field against Sparta. The outbreak of the Corinthian War began with battles fought on land near Corinth itself. Sparta, determined to maintain its authority, launched an invasion of the region. The resulting clashes revealed something remarkable. Corinth fought not against its traditional rival Athens, but alongside it. For the first time in generations, Corinthian and Athenian hoplites stood shoulder to shoulder in defense of a shared cause. This cooperation demonstrated how drastically the political landscape had shifted. Former enemies now collaborated, bound together by a common desire to prevent Spartan hegemony. The war soon expanded beyond the Peloponnese. Battles took place in central Greece, where Thebes contested Spartan influence, and in the Aegean Sea, where Athens sought to rebuild its naval power. Corinth, no longer possessing the same naval strength it once had, focused primarily on land engagements and diplomatic coordination. Yet the city's strategic location on the isthmus remained critical. Controlling this narrow passage meant controlling access between northern and southern Greece, and both sides recognized the importance of securing Corinthian territory. One of the central battlefields of the war was the region near Nemea, where Allied forces clashed with Sparta in a major land engagement. Corinthian hoplites participated heavily in this battle, fighting with determination against their former allies. While the Spartans achieved victories in several confrontations, their losses were significant, and the broader coalition remained united. The resilience of the anti-Spartan alliance revealed that Sparta's dominance, though formidable, was far from absolute. At sea, the war took on a different character. Athens, aided by Persian funds, rebuilt a fleet and began challenging Spartan naval power across the Aegean. Although Corinth's naval role was less prominent than in earlier conflicts, the city supported these efforts diplomatically and strategically. Corinthian leaders understood that naval pressure was essential for weakening Sparta's position and preventing the expansion of its influence across the Greek world. As the conflict continued, the Persian Empire played a decisive role by shifting its support. Initially backing the anti-Spartan coalition, Persia eventually grew concerned about Athens's renewed naval strength. Fearing the potential re-emergence of another Athenian maritime empire, Persia altered its policy. It negotiated with Sparta, offering support in exchange for recognition of Persian control over the Greek cities of Asia Minor. This diplomatic shift isolated the anti-Spartan coalition and set the stage for a negotiated settlement. The Corinthian War had reshaped the Greek world, weakening Sparta's dominance and revealing the fragility of any hegemon in a region defined by independent and often competing city-states. Although the king's peace temporarily stabilized the political landscape, it did not create lasting unity. Instead, it ushered in a period of shifting loyalties, rising regional powers, and strategic recalculations. For Corinth, this was a time of adaptation. Old alliances were tested, new rivals emerged, and the balance of power within Greece evolved at a pace that forced every major polis to reassess its role in a changing world. In the years following the Corinthian War, Sparta attempted to maintain its authority by enforcing the terms of the king's peace. Under this arrangement, Sparta acted as the guarantor of Greek autonomy, giving it justification to intervene in other states' affairs. But its interventions often appeared self-serving rather than protective. Many city-states grew increasingly frustrated as Sparta imposed political settlements, supported oligarchic factions, and used military pressure to maintain influence. Corinth, already wary of Spartan dominance after the Peloponnesian conflict, remained skeptical of Spartan leadership. This growing resentment across Greece opened the door for Thebes to rise as a major challenger. Historically overshadowed by Athens, Sparta, and Corinth, Thebes had long possessed the resources and population to wield greater power but lacked the political opportunity. That opportunity emerged when Sparta interfered in Theban affairs, attempting to impose a loyal government. Thebes resisted, eventually driving out the Spartan garrison stationed in its citadel. This decisive act marked the beginning of a dramatic shift in Greek politics. To Corinth and other Greek states dissatisfied with Spartan aggression, the rise of Thebes offered hope for a more balanced distribution of power. The Theban leaders, notably Epaminondas and Pelopidas, introduced innovative military strategies and reorganized their forces into highly trained units. The Theban Sacred Band, a select infantry group renowned for its discipline and courage, became central to Thebes' military successes. When Thebes confronted Sparta at the Battle of Leuctra, it achieved a stunning victory that shattered the myth of Spartan invincibility. For the first time in generations, Sparta found itself on the defensive. Corinth watched these developments with interest. The weakening of Sparta relieved some of the pressure that had shaped Corinthian politics for decades. Although Corinth did not align itself as closely with Thebes as some other states did, it benefited from the shifting balance of power. A politically fractured Greece, gave Corinth greater freedom to pursue its own interests in trade, diplomacy, and regional affairs. Yet this fragmentation also brought uncertainty. A strong Sparta had once been predictable, even if overbearing. A powerful Thebes introduced new dynamics that were harder to anticipate. The Theban ascendancy, however, proved brief. While Thebes succeeded in asserting influence across central and southern Greece, its leadership depended heavily on the talents of Epaminondas. His military campaigns in the Peloponnese, Thessaly, and other regions reconfigured alliances and challenged long-standing assumptions about power. Yet after his death in battle, Thebes struggled to maintain coherence and authority. Without strong and visionary leaders, the city's influence began to wane. During this transitional period, Corinth focused on preserving stability at home, while navigating a landscape marked by rapid changes. The city maintained its economic networks, leveraging its strategic location on the isthmus to ensure that trade continued to flow through its harbors. Craftsmen and merchants benefited from relative peace, even as political alliances shifted around them. Corinth's reputation for neutrality and pragmatism made it an attractive location for diplomatic discussions and commercial agreements. But the Greek world was becoming increasingly vulnerable to external intervention. The long period of internal conflict, first between Athens and Sparta, then involving Thebes, had exhausted many city-states. Their populations were reduced, treasuries strained, and armies weakened. These conditions created opportunities for rising powers beyond Greece to exert influence. Among these powers, Macedon under King Philip II stood poised to reshape Greek history. Macedon, located to the north of the traditional Greek heartland, had often been seen by southern Greeks as a less sophisticated kingdom. Yet this perception obscured the reality of Macedon's growing military and political capabilities. Philip II, trained in Thebes during his youth, understood both Greek politics and Greek military innovations. He modernized the Macedonian army, creating the formidable phalanx armed with long spears known as sarissas. He also strengthened the cavalry, allowing Macedon to conduct campaigns with remarkable coordination and efficiency. As Philip expanded his influence, Corinth and other Greek states observed with curiosity and concern. Initially, Macedonian intervention in Greek affairs seemed limited. Philip sought to secure territory in the north, consolidate control over Thrace, and gain access to strategic resources. But as he continued to expand, his interests inevitably extended into central Greece. The instability among the city-states created openings that Philip exploited through diplomacy, marriage alliances, and strategic military actions. One significant turning point came when Philip intervened in the conflict surrounding the Sacred War, a dispute involving Phocis and the Amphictyonic Council, an ancient religious body that managed affairs related to the sanctuary at Delphi. Philip presented himself as the protector of Greek religion, using this role to justify military operations in central Greece. As he gained victories, he gained prestige. Many Greeks began to see him as a stabilizing force, capable of restoring order to a region fractured by internal strife. Corinth's leaders recognized both the advantages and risks of Philip's expanding influence. On one hand, Macedon's ability to impose peace could protect trade routes and reduce the frequency of interstate conflicts that had disrupted commerce for generations. On the other hand, the rise of a single powerful ruler posed new threats to the autonomy that Corinth valued deeply. The city had resisted domination by Athens and Sparta. It was not prepared to accept Macedonian control without consideration. As Philip advanced into central Greece, diplomatic activity intensified. Corinth, along with other major cities, participated in discussions and alliances shaped by the evolving threat. Although Corinth did not immediately confront Philip, it contributed to the broader Greek effort to maintain balance. Yet these efforts ultimately culminated in armed conflict. At the Battle of Chaeronea, Philip's forces confronted a coalition of Greek city-states led primarily by Athens and Thebes. Corinth, though concerned about Macedonian expansion, played a more cautious role, reflecting its pragmatic approach to foreign involvement. The Greek coalition suffered a decisive defeat at Chaeronea. This battle marked the end of significant Greek military resistance to Macedon and signaled the beginning of a new political era. Yet Philip's strategy following the battle was not simply to conquer and dismantle the Greek city-states. Instead, he sought to integrate them into a broader political framework. His solution was the creation of the League of Corinth, a federation of Greek states established to unify the Greek world under Macedonian leadership for the purpose of launching a campaign against Persia. The League of Corinth represented a major turning point in Corinth's history. The city was chosen as the site for the League's formation, a symbolic gesture emphasizing unity and cooperation. Corinth's strategic location, long-standing commercial significance, and reputation as a place where Greek interests intersected made it an ideal host for such a gathering. Each member state retained nominal autonomy, but real authority in the League rested with Philip. Although the League presented itself as a cooperative alliance, it reflected the reality that Macedon now held decisive power in Greek affairs. With the rise of Macedon and the establishment of the League of Corinth, the Greek world entered the Hellenistic era, a period defined by shifting dynasties, expanding cultural horizons, and new forms of political organization. For Corinth, this era offered opportunities for prosperity, but also brought vulnerability as the city found itself positioned at the crossroads of competing Hellenistic powers. While Corinth had long been a significant player in Greek politics, the aftermath of Philip II's unification efforts placed the city in a very different role. Not a sovereign arbiter of regional affairs, but a valuable stronghold whose control became a prize for successive rulers. The death of Philip II and the subsequent rise of Alexander the Great rapidly transformed the geopolitical landscape. Although Alexander's campaigns stretched into Asia and reshaped the ancient world, Corinth itself did not play a direct military role in these distant conquests. Instead, its significance lay in its symbolic position within the League of Corinth. Alexander inherited leadership of the League, and thus the nominal allegiance of Corinth and other Greek states. Corinth became the location where Greek delegates reaffirmed their support for Alexander's Persian expedition, underscoring the city's importance as a diplomatic center. Yet while Corinth was not a battleground during Alexander's lifetime, the city's long-term fate was influenced profoundly by the turmoil that followed his death. When Alexander's empire fractured among his generals, the diadochi, the political unity imposed by Macedon dissolved, giving way to a patchwork of rival Hellenistic kingdoms. Macedon itself became the focus of competing dynastic claims. These disputes, combined with the ambitions of external powers, repeatedly shifted control of strategic Greek cities. Corinth, perched on the isthmus with its imposing Acrocorinth fortress, became a prize that no major power could ignore. The Corinth, towering above the city, was one of the most formidable defensive sites in Greece. Its steep slopes, natural springs, and extensive walls made it nearly impregnable. Whoever controlled the Corinth not only held Corinth, but also gained a crucial vantage point over the Peloponnese and the trade routes between mainland Greece and the western Mediterranean. During the Hellenistic period, this fortress became a political tool, passed among various rulers seeking influence over Greece. After Alexander's death, Corinth initially remained under Macedonian control. The Antipatrid and later the Antigonid dynasties recognized the value of retaining a strong presence in the region. Macedonian garrisons occupied the Corinth, serving as guardians or occupiers, depending on perspective, who ensured that Greek states did not challenge Macedonian authority too aggressively. This presence shaped Corinth's political life, limiting its autonomy while protecting its economic stability. Local leaders still managed daily affairs, but major decisions were influenced by the interests of Macedon. Despite these constraints, Corinth thrived culturally and economically during the Hellenistic period. The city's location continued to facilitate vigorous trade. Ships arriving from the Adriatic, Italy, and Sicily passed through Corinthine markets, exchanging goods with merchants from Asia Minor, the Aegean Islands, and northern Africa. This constant flow of goods contributed to a cosmopolitan atmosphere. Residents encountered traders, sailors, artisans, and travelers from across the Mediterranean, enriching the city's cultural diversity. Hellenistic Corinth saw flourishing artistic expression. The city's sculptors produced refined works that reflected the broader artistic trends of the era: realism, emotional depth, and dynamic movement. Public buildings, theaters, and sanctuaries received enhancements that displayed both Corinthian craftsmanship and imported influences from the wider Hellenistic world. Corinthian ceramics, already renowned, continued to evolve as artisans adopted new styles, techniques, and motifs inspired by external cultures. Religious life in Corinth also expanded during this time. Traditional Greek deities such as Apollo, Poseidon, and Aphrodite remained central to public worship. But new cults associated with the Hellenistic kingdoms began to appear. Some of these cults honored rulers or deified ancestors of the Macedonian dynasties. Others reflected broader cultural exchanges, including influences from Egypt and the Eastern Mediterranean. These developments did not replace traditional Corinthian religion, but added layers to the city's spiritual identity. The political story of Hellenistic Corinth, however, was far less stable. The Macedonians, intent on maintaining influence, treated Corinth as one of the key fetters of Greece, a term used to describe three strategic strongholds: Corinth, Demetrius, and Chalcis. These cities, when controlled by Macedon, ensured that resistance among Greek states could be contained. The Corinth, in particular, became a Macedonian stronghold from which troops could monitor and suppress potential revolts. Although Corinthian citizens continued daily activities, they lived under the shadow of foreign military power. As various Hellenistic rulers vied for control of Greece, Corinth occasionally changed hands through diplomacy, negotiation, or military action. The city's importance ensured that it was frequently used as a bargaining chip in treaties. At times, Macedonian rulers attempted to consolidate control by installing loyal governors or allowing local elites limited participation in governance. At other times, opposing Hellenistic powers sought to pry Corinth away from Macedon, recognizing that possession of the city granted both prestige and strategic advantage. One of the most significant shifts in Corinth's political alignment came when the Achaean League, a confederation of city-states in the Peloponnese, began expanding its influence. The Achaean League appealed to cities seeking autonomy from foreign garrisons and centralized control. Corinth, with its long tradition of independence, became a coveted member. After a period of negotiation and shifting alliances, the city eventually joined the League. This marked a moment of regained autonomy and regional participation. Membership in the Achaean League allowed Corinth to collaborate with neighboring cities in managing mutual defense, commerce, and political representation. However, membership in the League also drew Corinth into the growing tensions between the Achaean League and the Macedonian rulers. The balance of power continued to fluctuate, and Corinth again found itself in the middle of Hellenistic power struggles. Macedon remained determined to reassert influence over Greece, while the Achaean League sought to protect its members from external domination. Corinth's strategic significance made it a focal point of these competing visions. During this time, the Acrocorinth remained both an asset and a symbol. While Corinthian identity was tied to the steep fortress that had protected the city for centuries, the fortress increasingly represented foreign control rather than local autonomy. Observers in the ancient world often remarked on the fortress's strategic value, noting that whoever commanded it held effective control over the Peloponnese. The struggle for the Acrocorinth thus became a recurring theme in Hellenistic politics, with various rulers striving to secure or retain it. As the Hellenistic world continued to shift and fracture under the weight of competing dynasties, another power slowly but steadily expanded its influence across the Mediterranean: Rome. What began as a regional force on the Italian peninsula grew into a formidable republic capable of extending military, diplomatic, and economic power deep into territories once controlled by Greek kingdoms. For Corinth, the rise of Rome introduced new challenges and new uncertainties. The city, proud of its long history of autonomy and strategic importance, would soon find itself caught between the aspirations of the Achaean League and the expanding ambitions of Rome. A tension that would alter the course of Corinth's fate. To understand Corinth's relationship with Rome, it is essential to examine the broader context of Greek political life during the late Hellenistic period. After the era of Macedonian dominance, many Greek city-states sought new ways to preserve their independence and security. The Achaean League, which had grown to become one of the most successful federations in Greece, emerged as a key defender of the idea of collective autonomy. Corinth, with its deep-rooted desire to maintain self-governance, joined this league and participated actively in the political processes that shaped its direction. The Achaean League offered Corinth and other member states the promise of mutual defense, coordinated foreign policy, and shared political identity. Its leaders envisioned a Greece that could resist domination by external powers, whether Macedonian, Aetolian, or otherwise. This ideal resonated strongly within Corinth, a city that had experienced centuries of shifting domination, from tyrants and oligarchs to Macedonian rulers who stationed garrisons atop the Acrocorinth. Membership in the League gave Corinth a sense of empowerment and a voice in the regional decisions that influenced its future. Yet the world surrounding the Achaean League was changing quickly. Rome had already conquered Carthage, subdued much of the western Mediterranean, and defeated several Hellenistic monarchs who stood against it. Its growing presence in the eastern Mediterranean increasingly shaped the diplomatic landscape. When Macedon clashed with Rome in the series of conflicts known as the Macedonian Wars, Rome emerged victorious. These victories weakened Macedonian influence and opened the Greek mainland to Roman intervention. At first, many Greek states, including Corinth, welcomed Rome's involvement. Roman leaders proclaimed themselves liberators of Greece, asserting that their victories over Macedon were intended to free the Greek city-states from foreign domination. In a dramatic declaration at the Isthmian Games, held not far from Corinth, a Roman general announced that the Greek cities were henceforth autonomous. This proclamation was met with celebration. Corinth, which had long cherished its independence, celebrated the apparent restoration of Greek freedom. But Roman declarations often concealed deeper strategic motives. While Rome did not annex Greece immediately, it ensured that Greek affairs remained closely tied to Roman interests. The Republic expected gratitude, political cooperation, and alignment with its policies. When Greek states took actions that threatened regional stability or conflicted with Roman priorities, Roman leaders were quick to intervene. Corinth and the Achaean League soon discovered that Rome's assurances of autonomy came with significant expectations. Corinth's tensions with Rome began to escalate as the Achaean League grew more assertive. The League's desire to incorporate additional Greek states into its membership often clashed with Roman caution. Rome viewed the consolidation of Greek territories under the Achaean League as potentially destabilizing. While the League saw expansion as a means of strengthening Greek unity, Rome interpreted it as a challenge to the balance of power it sought to maintain. The conflict began to intensify when the Achaean League attempted to assert influence over Sparta. For centuries, Sparta had maintained a distinct identity, often standing apart from other Greek coalitions. When the League moved to integrate Sparta more fully, the situation became volatile. Internal Spartan factions appealed to Rome, claiming that the League's actions threatened their autonomy. Rome, wary of any League becoming too powerful, responded by urging restraint. But the Achaean League, motivated by a belief in Greek unity and suspicious of Roman interference, pushed forward regardless. Corinth, as a prominent member of the League, shared in the debates and decisions that shaped this conflict. Many Corinthians believed that Greece needed to reclaim its agency by standing together. Others warned that antagonizing Rome was risky, given the Republic's overwhelming military strength. The tension within Corinth reflected a broader struggle across Greece: how to balance aspirations for independence with the looming presence of a foreign superpower. Diplomatic friction grew sharper when Rome issued repeated demands for the League to resolve disputes with Sparta peacefully. The Achaean League interpreted these demands as violations of Greek sovereignty. Corinthian delegates, along with other representatives, expressed frustration that Rome, an external power, was increasingly dictating how Greek states should manage their internal affairs. The ideological tension between autonomy and external oversight began to harden into political conflict. Meanwhile, trade and economic relations between Corinth and Rome were growing more complicated. Roman merchants, soldiers, and administrators traveled through Greece more frequently. While some Corinthians benefited from increased interaction, others resented the growing influence of Roman culture and commerce in Greek markets. Corinth's long-standing identity as a cosmopolitan hub meant that it had absorbed foreign influences many times before. But the scale and permanence of Roman involvement felt different. This was not simply cultural exchange. It was the presence of a rising empire. Rome's patience with the Achaean League decreased as conflicts persisted. The League grew more defiant, believing that unity among Greek states could offset Roman demands. Corinth, proud and historically resistant to domination, was among the cities that supported firm resistance to Roman interference. The League's leaders delivered speeches emphasizing that Greece had survived countless invasions and political struggles, and that Romans should not be allowed to dictate Greek affairs. But Rome interpreted this defiance as a direct challenge to its authority. A series of diplomatic incidents escalated tensions further. When the Achaean League refused to meet certain Roman demands regarding Sparta, Rome sent envoys with increasingly severe warnings. Corinthian delegates responded with heated arguments defending Greek autonomy. Ancient accounts describe bitter exchanges in which Roman envoys were insulted or dismissed, leading Rome to conclude that the League, and Corinth in particular, was becoming dangerously hostile. Internal divisions within the Achaean League also began to weaken its position. Some member states advocated compromise with Rome, fearing the consequences of confrontation. Others, including many Corinthians, insisted that Greek independence must not be surrendered. These debates fractured the cohesion of the League and made coordinated action more difficult. The rising tensions between the Achaean League and Rome had been building toward a breaking point, and Corinth found itself positioned at the center of this escalating conflict. For decades, Corinth had served as a leading voice in defending Greek autonomy. The city's history, its pride, and its strategic location made it both a symbol and a bastion of resistance. Yet these same qualities also marked Corinth as the primary target when Rome decided to impose its authority decisively on the Greek mainland. The confrontation that followed was not merely a battle. It was a turning point that reshaped the trajectory of Greek history and left a legacy of devastation that echoed through centuries. To fully understand the destruction of Corinth, it is essential to examine the political climate within the Achaean League as conflict approached. The League had grown increasingly divided, with some cities urging caution, while others, including Corinth, advocated for a firm stance against Roman demands. The League's leadership, influenced heavily by passionate orators and determined patriots, argued that Greece had an obligation to resist external domination. These leaders viewed Rome's interventions as intolerable infringements on Greek sovereignty. Corinth, long celebrated for its independence, became the most outspoken defender of this position. Public debates in the city grew heated as citizens reaffirmed their commitment to the ideals of self-governance. Many Corinthian voices insisted that surrendering to Rome would betray the sacrifices of generations who had fought to preserve Greek freedom. The political mood intensified as rallies, speeches, and solemn assemblies emphasized the significance of the struggle ahead. Rome, however, had reached the limit of its patience. To Roman leaders, the Achaean League's defiance appeared increasingly irrational and destabilizing. The Republic had invested considerable effort in shaping a balance of power within the Greek world, and the League's ongoing resistance threatened to undermine Roman authority across the eastern Mediterranean. Roman envoys reported hostility and disrespect during diplomatic exchanges with Corinthian delegates, incidents that hardened the Roman Senate's resolve. The situation had transformed from a political disagreement into a matter of Roman prestige. As the Achaean League continued to refuse Roman directives, Rome prepared a military response. The Republic dispatched a powerful force led by experienced commanders who had already proven themselves in campaigns across Europe, Africa, and Asia. These legions were well-trained, well-equipped, and accustomed to overcoming complex defenses. Corinth, though fortified and capable of fielding troops, lacked the capacity to resist such a force for long. The Acrocorinth, the city's formidable fortress, symbolized strength, but even this mighty stronghold could not match the organizational and military superiority of Rome. The year in which Roman forces reached the Greek mainland marked the beginning of the final chapter for independent Corinth. As Roman legions advanced, they encountered pockets of resistance from Achaean forces, but these efforts were fragmented and ultimately ineffective. The cohesion that had once made the League a formidable regional power had eroded under years of internal disputes and the overwhelming challenge posed by Rome. When the Roman army approached Corinth, the city prepared for a last stand. Citizens armed themselves, assisted by Achaean soldiers who had gathered to defend the city. The mood within Corinth was a mixture of determination and dread. While there was pride in resisting a foreign conqueror, there was also fear of the consequences if the defense failed. The city's leaders, unwilling to abandon their principles, chose to confront the Roman threat rather than negotiate surrender. The Roman commander tasked with subduing Corinth was Lucius Mummius, a general who followed the disciplined Roman approach to warfare. He understood that the defeat of Corinth required not only military victory, but also a demonstration of Roman might that would deter future resistance throughout Greece. As the siege began, Mummius's forces encircled the city, cutting off supply routes and applying pressure on all sides. The Achaean defenders fought bravely, but they were overmatched. Roman siegecraft, honed across numerous wars, used disciplined formations, engineering techniques, and relentless pressure to weaken Corinthian defenses. When the Romans finally breached the city's walls, the ensuing battle was fierce but brief. Corinthian defenders, outnumbered and exhausted, were unable to withstand the final Roman assault. Ancient accounts describe scenes of intense fighting, with civilians and soldiers alike attempting to defend their homes and families. Yet the outcome had never been in doubt. The Roman war machine, designed for efficiency and conquest, quickly overwhelmed the defenders. Once Corinth fell, Lucius Mummius ordered a level of destruction rarely seen in Greek history. The city was sacked, its wealth seized, and its artworks taken as spoils. Roman soldiers, following the harsh customs of ancient warfare, enslaved survivors and set fire to buildings. The city's treasures, including masterfully crafted sculptures, paintings, metalwork, and ceremonial objects, were collected for transport to Rome. These artifacts would later adorn Roman temples, public spaces, and private estates, serving as tangible symbols of Rome's triumph over Greek independence. Mummius, though not known for artistic sensitivity, famously warned those responsible for transporting Corinthian artworks that they would be held personally accountable should any piece be damaged or lost. This statement, recorded by ancient historians, reflects the value Rome placed on the cultural heritage it acquired through conquest. Even if Roman understanding of Greek art varied widely among individuals. The destruction of Corinth was meant not just to punish the city, but to send a message to all of Greece. By utterly dismantling one of the most storied and prosperous cities of the Greek world, Rome demonstrated that opposition to its authority would not be tolerated. The sack of Corinth also symbolized the end of Greek political autonomy. Though cities and leagues would continue to exist, their independence had effectively been extinguished. From this moment forward, Greece would operate within a Roman political framework. The destruction of Corinth by Roman forces had left the once thriving metropolis in ruins. For decades, the site remained largely abandoned, its shattered walls and charred remains standing as a stark reminder of the consequences of resisting Rome. Travelers described the abandoned city as hauntingly silent, with only scattered shepherds and passing merchants crossing its empty streets. Yet despite the devastation, the strategic and economic value of Corinth did not diminish. Its position on the isthmus remained vital to movement, trade, and military logistics. The Romans, masters of recognizing and exploiting strategic locations, would eventually look upon the ruins with new purpose. Corinth's rebirth began during the final years of the Roman Republic, when Julius Caesar initiated a sweeping set of reforms that included establishing new colonies to support both economic expansion and the growing number of Roman citizens in need of land. As part of this broader initiative, he ordered the refounding of Corinth as a Roman colony. The new settlement was officially named Colonia Laus Iulia Corinthiensis, a title that honored Caesar and symbolized Rome's attempt to rejuvenate a site of immense historical significance. The decision to rebuild Corinth was not purely symbolic. Rome recognized that the isthmus offered unmatched advantages for trade and military logistics. By restoring Corinth, Rome could control the movement of goods across the land bridge between northern Greece and the Peloponnese, revitalize commercial traffic, and establish a strong administrative center in a region that had long been politically sensitive. The Romans were skilled at transforming conquered territories into productive assets, and Corinth presented an ideal opportunity to apply this expertise. The settlers who arrived to rebuild Corinth were primarily Roman citizens, including veterans of Caesar's legions and Roman freedmen. Veterans brought discipline, experience, and loyalty to the new colony, while freedmen brought skills, ambition, and a desire to improve their fortunes. Together, they formed a diverse community with strong ties to Roman culture and politics. These settlers established homes, shops, workshops, and public buildings, quickly transforming the ruins into a functioning Roman city. One of the earliest priorities in rebuilding Corinth was establishing a Roman-style urban plan. Unlike the organic layout of many older Greek cities, Roman colonies typically followed a grid pattern centered on two main streets: the Cardo, running north to south, and the Decumanus, running east to west. At their intersection stood the Forum, the heart of civic life. The Forum of the New Corinth featured administrative buildings, temples, markets, and public spaces designed in the architectural style of the Roman Republic. This deliberate organization revealed Rome's intention not merely to repopulate Corinth, but to redefine it. The New Corinth was Roman in governance, architecture, and legal structure. Yet the Romans did not erase the city's Greek heritage entirely. Instead, they incorporated Greek elements into the new urban environment. Temples dedicated to Greek gods were restored or rebuilt. Markets continued to sell goods from across the Greek world, and local customs influenced religious and cultural practices. This blending of Greek and Roman elements became a hallmark of life in the New Corinth. Economically, the refounded city flourished with remarkable speed. Corinth's harbors, Lycaeum on the Corinthian Gulf and Century on the Saronic Gulf, were revived and improved. These harbors became critical points in Rome's east-west trade networks. Ships bringing goods from Italy, Sicily, and the western Mediterranean docked at Lycaeum, while vessels arriving from Asia Minor, the Levant, and Egypt docked at Century. Merchants found that Corinth offered access to both maritime spheres without the long, dangerous journey around the Peloponnese. The diolkos, the ancient trackway used to transport ships and cargo across the isthmus, was repaired and adapted to serve Roman needs. This engineering marvel allowed Corinth to charge fees for transport services, creating a steady stream of income. Roman officials stationed at the city managed tolls, customs duties, and trade regulations. As a result, Corinth quickly became one of the wealthiest cities in Roman Greece, attracting traders, artisans, and laborers from across the empire. The social life of Roman Corinth reflected its diverse population. Roman settlers introduced Latin language, Roman law, and Roman social customs. But Greek residents and traders continued to play major roles in daily life. The city became a cultural crossroads where Latin and Greek mingled freely in speech, writing, and public ceremonies. Public entertainment, such as theater performances, athletic competitions, and gladiatorial games, offered opportunities for people of many backgrounds to gather. Temples dedicated to both Greek and Roman deities stood side by side, illustrating the syncretic nature of Corinthian religious life. One of the most influential aspects of Corinth's revival was its political role in Roman administration. As a major colony, Corinth served as the capital of the newly established Roman province of Achaia. This made the city the administrative center for all of Roman Greece, giving it political authority that extended far beyond the isthmus. Roman governors resided in Corinth, holding court, collecting taxes, and managing provincial affairs. The presence of provincial officials drew lawyers, merchants, and petitioners from throughout the region. The inclusion of Corinth within the Roman provincial system also meant that the city became part of Rome's broader geopolitical strategy. Roman roads were constructed or improved throughout Greece, linking Corinth to neighboring regions and reinforcing its role as a transportation hub. Troops could be deployed quickly to various parts of the province, and supplies could be distributed with efficiency unmatched in earlier periods. Corinth's revived infrastructure thus served both economic and military purposes. Corinth's cultural significance continued to grow during this period. The city hosted festivals and ceremonies that attracted participants from across the Mediterranean. Athletic competitions, dramatic performances, and religious celebrations enhanced Corinth's reputation as a dynamic cultural center. In particular, the Isthmian Games, revived under Roman rule, once again drew athletes, spectators, and dignitaries. While these games maintained their Greek origins, Roman influence introduced new elements, including broader participation from regions across the empire. Despite its rapid growth and cultural vibrancy, Roman Corinth was not without social tensions. Wealth accumulated quickly, but not evenly. Some Roman settlers gained vast fortunes through trade and land ownership, while others struggled. Greek residents sometimes resented Roman dominance, particularly in political and legal matters. Enslaved individuals, who formed a substantial portion of the labor force, lived under harsh conditions, contributing to the city's prosperity without sharing in its benefits. These inequalities reflected broader patterns across the Roman Empire. Religious diversity added another layer to Corinthian society. Alongside traditional Greek and Roman cults, Eastern mystery religions began to appear. Worshippers of Isis, Mithras, and other deities established communities within the city. These cults offered personal spiritual experiences that differed from public religious festivals, attracting followers from various social classes. The presence of these religions demonstrated Corinth's openness to new ideas and its role as a cosmopolitan hub within the empire. As Corinth settled into its new identity as a Roman colony, the city entered a long period of prosperity, cultural exchange, and growing regional influence. The Roman reconstruction had laid strong foundations: organized streets, functional harbors, administrative buildings, and new public spaces. Yet the true transformation of Corinth came not merely from infrastructure, but from the extraordinary diversity and activity that pulsated through the city during this era. Corinth became a commercial crossroads, a legal center, and eventually a significant place in the early history of Christianity. Under Roman rule, the city flourished as one of the most vibrant and cosmopolitan communities in the Mediterranean world. Corinth's economic strength during the Roman period rested on its role as a central hub for trade. Its two harbors, Lycaeum and Century, became key nodes in a maritime network linking Italy, Greece, Asia Minor, Syria, Egypt, and North Africa. Few cities in the Roman world occupied a location so perfectly suited for commerce. Goods arriving from Italy and the Western Mediterranean passed through Corinth via Lycaeum, while products from the Aegean and the East entered through Century. The flow of goods between these two harbors allowed merchants to bypass the long, treacherous voyage around the Peloponnese. The presence of the diolkos, an ancient trackway that facilitated overland transport across the isthmus, continued to benefit Corinth centuries after its original construction. Under Roman administration, the diolkos was repaired, expanded, and regulated. Teams of laborers transported cargoes, and in some cases, small ships across the isthmus, reducing travel time and risk for merchants. Corinth collected fees for this service, contributing further to the city's wealth. The diolkos allowed the Romans to move military supplies and personnel across Greece with extraordinary speed, enhancing Corinth's strategic value. Inside the city, commercial activity radiated outward from the bustling forum. The forum served as a marketplace, civic center, and social gathering space. Shops lined the streets leading into the square, selling goods ranging from luxury items, such as fine textiles, perfumes, and jewelry, to everyday necessities like tools, pottery, and foodstuffs. Artisans operated workshops producing metal goods, leather items, and ceramics, while traders negotiated deals with visiting merchants from across the empire. The wealth generated from trade supported an active building program. Public buildings, temples, fountains, and baths expanded throughout the city. The Romans invested heavily in urban amenities, creating spaces that reflected the grandeur of Roman architecture while accommodating the city's Greek heritage. The theater was restored and enhanced, allowing dramatic performances to flourish. The Odeon provided a venue for music, poetry, and civic events. Elaborate fountains, fed by aqueducts and springs, adorned public spaces, offering both practical water access and aesthetic beauty. Religion in Roman Corinth reflected the cultural diversity that trade had fostered. Traditional Greek cults remained active, and temples dedicated to Apollo, Aphrodite, and Poseidon received continuous attention. Roman deities joined the local pantheon, with temples constructed for Jupiter, Mars, and other gods of the Roman state. Religious festivals incorporated elements from both Greek and Roman traditions, reinforcing the blended identity of the city. Yet the most striking religious development during this era was the emergence of an early Christian community in Corinth. The city's mobility, diversity, and social tensions created fertile ground for new beliefs. Merchants, sailors, laborers, freedmen, and enslaved individuals all contributed to a dynamic social landscape in which ideas circulated rapidly. Corinth's position as a major port exposed it to influences from Judea, Egypt, Syria, and Asia Minor, regions where the message of Christianity began spreading during the first century of the Common Era. It was during this period that the Apostle Paul visited Corinth, a moment that would become foundational to Christian history. According to early Christian traditions, Paul arrived in Corinth after traveling through Macedonia and Athens. In Corinth, he found a city bustling with people from every corner of the empire, a population hungry for meaning, community, and spiritual guidance. Paul spent considerable time in the city, working alongside local artisans while preaching in synagogues and public spaces. Paul's teachings attracted a diverse group of followers, including Jews, Greeks, Romans, freedmen, merchants, and laborers. The social composition of the Corinthian Christian community reflected the city's broader diversity. Some members were wealthy and influential, others lived in poverty. These differences would later shape Paul's letters, which addressed conflicts and divisions within the community. The Corinthian struggles with inequality, moral challenges, and cultural tensions became some of the most vivid illustrations of early Christian life. The letters Paul later sent to the Corinthian community, known as 1 Corinthians and 2 Corinthians in the New Testament, offer remarkable insight into the city's social and spiritual fabric during the Roman era. These letters address disputes over leadership, practices within communal gatherings, questions of ethics, and the challenges of living within a multicultural urban environment. They reveal the complexity of Corinthian society and the ways in which early Christian teachings attempted to bridge divides across class, ethnicity, and tradition. While Christianity grew slowly, the dominant religious landscape of Corinth remained polytheistic. Mystery cults also flourished, offering personal religious experiences distinct from traditional civic worship. Cults dedicated to Isis, Mithras, and Dionysus attracted followers from various social backgrounds. These cults often held ceremonies, initiations, and rituals that appealed to individuals seeking spiritual transformation or protection in a world of uncertainty. The presence of multiple religious traditions did not always lead to conflict. Corinth's long history as a cosmopolitan center had accustomed its residents to diversity. Roman officials recognized the need to manage religious practices carefully, allowing various groups to coexist peacefully as long as they did not challenge political authority. This tolerance allowed Christianity to take root, even though it remained a minority faith during the early Roman period. Civic life in Corinth reflected the structured governance typical of Roman colonies. A city council composed of local magistrates handled municipal affairs, while Roman provincial governors oversaw legal matters, tax collection, and imperial directives. The governor's residence, often referred to as the praetorium, served as a symbol of Roman authority. Trials, proclamations, and administrative decisions occurred in this space, drawing local citizens and visitors into the civic rhythms of Roman governance. The social hierarchy in Corinth was complex and layered. Roman citizens held privileged legal status, followed by Greek residents, foreign merchants, freedmen, and enslaved individuals. Wealth, however, often played a more important role in daily interactions than ethnicity or legal status. Successful merchants, regardless of origin, could rise to influential positions within the city. Freedmen who prospered in business gained social prestige. Enslaved individuals, although denied freedom, sometimes occupied skilled roles in workshops, households, and commercial enterprises. Corinth's prosperity under Roman rule attracted migrants seeking opportunities. The city's population grew steadily, filled with people drawn by commerce, artisanship, entertainment, and the promise of economic advancement. Tensions inevitably emerged as different groups competed for resources, recognition, and influence. Paul's letters attest to social divisions between wealthy and poor Christians. But these issues extended far beyond the Christian community. Class differences shaped interactions in markets, feast halls, temples, and public spaces. Entertainment flourished in Roman Corinth. Gladiatorial games, introduced by Roman settlers, became popular public spectacles. While Greek traditions favored athletic competitions and dramatic performances, Roman tastes brought new forms of entertainment. Amphitheaters hosted contests that drew crowds eager for excitement. These events reinforced Roman cultural influence and offered communal experiences that blended spectacle with social cohesion. As the Roman Empire moved into late antiquity, Corinth once again found itself navigating a world in transformation. The prosperity and cultural vibrancy of earlier centuries continued to shape the city. Yet new pressures, political, environmental, and religious, began to alter the course of Corinth's development. The transition from the classical Roman world to the Byzantine era did not happen abruptly. It unfolded through a series of gradual changes. Corinth adapted to these shifts with resilience, using its strategic position, fortified landscape, and economic networks to maintain relevance even as the structures of empire evolved around it. One of the most significant forces shaping Corinth in late antiquity was the gradual reorganization of the Roman Empire. The empire's vast territories stretched across regions with differing cultures, languages, and political traditions. To improve governance, Roman emperors introduced administrative reforms that divided provinces, reorganized bureaucracies, and established new political centers. Achaia, the province that included Corinth, remained an important part of the eastern regions of the empire. As power increasingly shifted eastward toward Constantinople, Corinth came under the influence of a political world that was both Roman and distinctly Greek. During this period, Christianity evolved from a minority faith into the official religion of the empire. This shift carried profound consequences for Corinth. The city's diverse religious environment, once filled with temples dedicated to Greek and Roman gods, began to transform. Many traditional sanctuaries declined in importance, and Christian communities expanded their presence. Churches were constructed near or atop former pagan sites, symbolizing both continuity and change. Bishops emerged as influential figures within the community, contributing not only to spiritual life, but also to civic affairs. Corinth's Christian identity strengthened as the city became the center of a bishopric. Ecclesiastical leaders participated in regional councils, exchanged correspondence with other Christian communities, and shaped local interpretations of doctrine. The memory of earlier Christian traditions, including the writings of Paul, held special resonance. Though centuries had passed since Paul's visits, Corinthian Christians saw themselves as stewards of a legacy that linked their city to the earliest days of the faith. While religion served as a stabilizing force, environmental challenges disrupted Corinth's urban life. The region was prone to earthquakes, and several significant tremors struck the city during late antiquity. These earthquakes damaged buildings, disrupted trade, and forced repeated cycles of reconstruction. Archaeological evidence reveals rebuilding projects from this era, suggesting that Corinthian leaders and residents worked diligently to restore essential structures after each disaster. Temples, marketplaces, and public buildings were repaired or replaced as the community strove to maintain normalcy despite natural upheaval. Yet earthquakes were not the only threat. The centuries following the height of Roman power brought increased pressure from external groups. Germanic peoples, Gothic raiders, and other migrating populations pushed into Roman territories, testing the empire's defenses. Although Corinth itself did not suffer a major barbarian conquest during this period, the sense of insecurity prompted a renewed emphasis on fortifications. The Acrocorinth, always the city's greatest defensive asset, gained renewed importance. Roman and later Byzantine authorities strengthened its walls, repaired ancient battlements, and stationed soldiers on the massive rock. The fortress's steep slopes and commanding views made it nearly impossible for enemies to seize. Control of the Acrocorinth provided security not only for the city below, but also for the surrounding region, especially the routes connecting the Peloponnese with central Greece. In addition to reinforcing the Acrocorinth, Corinth's leaders invested in new defensive structures within the city. Wall circuits were rebuilt or expanded to protect residential districts, marketplaces, and administrative centers. These fortifications reflected broader trends across the empire, as cities fortified themselves against raids, rebellions, and military disruptions. The need for protection influenced urban planning, directing resources away from monumental architecture and toward practical defense. While Corinth strengthened its fortifications, its economy adapted to shifting imperial priorities. Trade remained central to the city's identity, though patterns changed as political boundaries fluctuated. Corinth continued to benefit from its location at the isthmus, but the nature of trade evolved. The Eastern Mediterranean increasingly dominated imperial commerce, and Corinth's connection to Constantinople grew stronger. Goods traveled through Corinth's harbors en route to the new imperial capital, and Eastern influences became more visible in Corinthian art, architecture, and everyday life. Craft production persisted, though transformed by new cultural and economic influences. Workshops produced ceramics, metal objects, textiles, and glassware that blended traditional Greek styles with styles introduced from the eastern provinces. The spread of Christianity also shaped artistic themes, as religious symbols and decorative motifs reflected evolving beliefs. Everyday objects reveal the interplay of continuity and innovation in Corinth's cultural life. Byzantine administration added further layers to Corinth's identity. As the Roman Empire's western half declined and eventually collapsed, the eastern half became the Byzantine Empire, governed from Constantinople. Corinth became part of this new political world, subject to Byzantine governors, laws, and tax systems. Yet the transition did not erase the city's Roman past. Latin remained in use for legal matters, Roman institutions persisted in modified forms, and the hybrid culture that defined late antiquity blended Roman, Greek, and Christian elements seamlessly. Corinth's status as a regional center endured. The city served as a hub for governance, commerce, and military operations in southern Greece. Traveling officials passed through Corinth on their way to other parts of the Peloponnese. Merchants moving between the Aegean and Ionian seas relied on its infrastructure. Soldiers stationed on the Acro-Corinth protected trade routes and monitored strategic movements. The city's importance was not solely historical. It remained relevant in the daily functioning of the Byzantine world. Life in late antique Corinth reflected both resilience and adaptation. Houses were rebuilt, with new designs suited to the needs of the era. Public baths continued to operate, though some were repurposed as newer Christian norms shaped concepts of public life. Marketplaces remained active, even as trade routes shifted. Schools and cultural institutions preserved aspects of classical learning, though increasingly filtered through Christian frameworks. The population of Corinth during this era was diverse. Greek-speaking residents formed the majority, but traders, officials, and travelers from various parts of the empire passed through the city. This mobility sustained Corinth's cosmopolitan nature. Even as political authority centralized in Constantinople, Corinth's local culture retained distinct traits shaped by its geography and history. As the ancient world gave way to the medieval era, Corinth entered a period marked by dramatic shifts in political power, military conflict, and cultural influence. Throughout these centuries, the city's greatest asset, its strategic location on the isthmus, continued to define its fate. Whoever controlled Corinth controlled the gateway between northern and southern Greece. And the mighty Acro-Corinth fortress, towering above the city, ensured that power over Corinth meant power over the Peloponnese. Consequently, Byzantines, Crusaders, Venetians, and Ottomans all sought dominion over this critical stronghold. The story of medieval Corinth is therefore one of resilience amid continual upheaval. In the early medieval period, Corinth remained under Byzantine rule. Although the Byzantine Empire had inherited the administrative structures of the Roman world, medieval pressures reshaped the city's function and importance. Corinth supported regional governance, collected taxes, and housed military forces responsible for defending the Peloponnese. The city's Christian identity deepened as bishops assumed important roles in civic life, and churches expanded to serve growing congregations. Although the larger empire faced threats from Slavic incursions, Persian conflicts, and internal instability, Corinth managed to preserve relative stability thanks to its fortifications and geographic advantages. The Acro-Corinth became increasingly central to the city's medieval security. Byzantine engineers repaired and expanded existing walls, transforming the fortress into a multi-layered defensive complex. Cisterns within the fortress ensured water supplies during sieges, while steep cliffs made direct assaults exceedingly difficult. With each political shift, the Acro-Corinth served as both a refuge and a symbol of authority. Whether held by Byzantines or enemy forces, the fortress signaled control over the Peloponnese. Beginning in the early medieval centuries, the southern Greek mainland experienced waves of invasions from Slavic groups who migrated into Byzantine territories. Corinth, protected by the Acro-Corinth and supported by imperial troops, resisted large-scale settlement by these groups. The city thus remained an important Byzantine stronghold in a region where imperial influence sometimes waned. Trade and agriculture continued, though more modestly than in the grand days of the Roman Empire. Corinth still served as a regional commercial center, but its prosperity depended increasingly on local resources and defensive stability rather than long-distance trade. For several centuries, Byzantine control over Corinth persisted, interrupted only briefly by internal rebellions or administrative changes. The city's population included Greek-speaking farmers, artisans, clergy, merchants, and soldiers. Religious institutions provided continuity, and local bishops corresponded with ecclesiastical leaders in Constantinople. Although political structures became more decentralized compared to earlier Roman administration, Corinth maintained strong ties to the Byzantine heartland. A profound turning point arrived with the Fourth Crusade, when Western European crusaders diverted from their original mission to attack Constantinople. The subsequent collapse of Byzantine authority in parts of Greece opened the door for new rulers. Corinth fell under the control of a medieval Frankish principality known as the Principality of Achaia. This period marked a significant cultural shift, as Latin-speaking rulers introduced Western European customs, feudal practices, and Catholic ecclesiastical structures into the region. Under Frankish rule, the Acrocorinth was further fortified, reflecting the Western European emphasis on castle building and military architecture. The new rulers recognized that controlling the fortress was essential for maintaining power over the surrounding territory. They installed garrisons, reinforced walls, and used the Acrocorinth as both a defensive position and a seat of regional authority. While the local Greek population maintained their language and Orthodox Christian identity, they now lived under the jurisdiction of Latin lords who imposed feudal obligations and controlled economic resources. The transition to Frankish rule also influenced Corinth's commercial and political life. Western European merchants, knights, and clergy arrived, creating a more diverse cultural environment. Latin churches stood alongside Greek Orthodox churches, and different languages filled the markets and streets. Trade with Italian city-states such as Venice and Genoa increased, as these maritime powers extended their networks into former Byzantine territories. Corinth served as a link in this emerging Mediterranean economy, though political instability often limited long-term prosperity. Byzantium, determined to reclaim lost territories, continued to challenge Frankish control. Byzantine forces eventually regained parts of the Peloponnese, but Corinth remained contested. The struggle for control of the Acrocorinth symbolized the broader conflict between Byzantine and Latin powers. The Byzantines eventually succeeded in recovering Corinth, integrating it once again into the restored Byzantine despotate of the Morea. Under Byzantine rule, the city experienced renewed stability, though the empire itself was significantly weakened and under constant threat from emerging powers. During this late Byzantine phase, Corinth benefited from relative peace, modest economic growth, and continued cultural development. Local artisans produced goods for regional markets. Farmers cultivated fertile lands around the city, and religious institutions thrived. However, the Byzantine Empire itself faced mounting challenges from both internal problems and external enemies, particularly the rising Ottoman Empire. The Ottomans, expanding steadily westward, gradually absorbed territories once controlled by Byzantium, the Crusader states, and regional Greek rulers. As the Ottoman frontier approached the Peloponnese, Corinth again became a critical defensive position. Controlling the Acrocorinth meant controlling access to the region and preventing Ottoman forces from advancing deeper into Greece. Recognizing this, Byzantine authorities reinforced the fortress, attempting to prepare for the Ottoman onslaught. Yet the weakening Byzantine state could no longer defend its territories effectively. Ottoman forces, skilled in siege warfare and supported by substantial manpower, eventually captured the city. As Corinth fell under Ottoman rule, it entered yet another phase of transformation. Unlike earlier conquerors, the Ottomans incorporated Corinth into a vast imperial system that spanned parts of Europe, Asia, and Africa. Ottoman administration introduced new structures of governance, taxation, and land ownership. The local population adapted to these changes while preserving many aspects of their Greek cultural heritage. Under Ottoman rule, the Acrocorinth served as a military garrison and administrative center. The Ottomans, like the Byzantines and Crusaders before them, recognized the fortress's unparalleled strategic importance. They strengthened walls, installed cannons, and stationed troops capable of responding to threats from sea or land. The fortress's layered defenses reflected centuries of architectural evolution, blending Byzantine, Frankish, Venetian, and Ottoman design. Daily life in Ottoman Corinth reflected a blend of Greek customs and Ottoman influences. Markets offered goods produced locally, as well as products brought through Ottoman trade networks. Greek Orthodox churches continued to function, though under conditions regulated by Ottoman authorities. Muslim populations, including soldiers and administrators, became part of the city's social landscape. While tensions existed, especially regarding taxation and political authority, communities coexisted under the Ottoman system. As the medieval and early modern eras drew to a close, Corinth found itself once again at the center of transformative forces reshaping the Greek world. The centuries of Byzantine rule, Crusader control, Venetian occupations, and Ottoman governance had left deep imprints on the city. Yet the people of Corinth, like Greeks across the region, continued to preserve a cultural identity rooted in language, faith, and collective memory. The dawn of the modern era ushered in a new chapter defined by revolution, the struggle for independence, and the eventual formation of the modern Greek state. For Corinth, these developments brought both destruction and renewal, ultimately giving rise to the modern city that stands today. The Ottoman Empire, which had dominated Corinth for generations, faced growing challenges during the early modern period. Economic pressures, political fragmentation, and the rise of nationalist movements weakened Ottoman authority in various regions. Among the most determined of these movements was the Greek desire for independence. Inspired by Enlightenment ideas, earlier uprisings, and cultural revival, Greek intellectuals and local leaders began to articulate the possibility of a sovereign Greek nation free from Ottoman rule. By this time, Corinth had become a largely rural and regional center. Yet its strategic position and symbolic heritage ensured that it played an important role in the developing struggle. When the Greek War of Independence began in the early 19th century, the Peloponnese quickly emerged as a major battleground. Local leaders, revolutionary fighters, and civic figures rallied their communities, forming militias and initiating coordinated efforts against Ottoman forces. Corinth, positioned as the gateway to the Peloponnese, became one of the first cities to experience revolutionary activity. Greek fighters, motivated by a vision of national liberation, sought to capture Corinth as part of their broader strategy to consolidate control over southern Greece. The Acrocorinth, which had served as a fortress for countless rulers across the centuries, once again became a focal point of conflict. The Ottomans had maintained a strong garrison at the fortress, recognizing its defensive importance. Greek revolutionary forces, aware that they could not control the region without securing the Acrocorinth, laid siege to the stronghold. The siege reflected the determination and resourcefulness of the revolutionaries, who faced well-armed defenders positioned atop one of the most formidable fortresses in the Mediterranean. Despite the challenges, the Greek forces eventually succeeded in capturing the fortress. This victory carried immense symbolic and strategic significance. The fall of the Acrocorinth demonstrated that even the most imposing Ottoman strongholds were vulnerable to the revolutionary cause. Moreover, it allowed Greek forces to establish control over much of the Peloponnese, strengthening their position in the early phases of the war. Corinth's liberation became part of a larger narrative of Greek resilience, sacrifice, and struggle during the fight for independence. However, the war was far from straightforward. Ottoman forces launched counterattacks, internal divisions emerged among Greek commanders, and geopolitical dynamics shifted as foreign powers weighed the conflict's implications. Corinth, due to its location, endured cycles of occupation, abandonment, and renewed fighting. Homes and public buildings suffered damage, and the city's population faced shortages, dislocation, and insecurity. Yet amid the chaos, the dream of an independent Greek nation endured. As the war progressed, European powers increasingly intervened. Support from Britain, France, and Russia ultimately contributed to securing Greek independence. The subsequent formation of the modern Greek state dramatically altered the political landscape of the region. Corinth, long accustomed to shifting rulers and contested borders, now found itself integrated into a national framework that shared its language, culture, and aspirations. Following independence, Corinth faced the challenge of rebuilding. The old medieval and Ottoman-era settlement that lay beneath the Corinth had suffered greatly during the war and lacked the infrastructure needed for a modern administrative center. Greek planners, influenced by contemporary notions of urban order, hygiene, and modern governance, decided to establish a new town on the coast rather than rebuild entirely on the older inland site. This decision marked a significant turning point in Corinth's physical and social landscape. The new town of Corinth began to take shape near the Gulf of Corinth, close to the harbor that would support the region's commercial revival. The city's layout reflected modern planning principles, with organized streets, designated public squares, and provisions for administrative buildings. As residents relocated from the older settlement, the new Corinth became a symbol of national renewal, a city rising from the struggles of war and embracing the opportunities of independence. Economic development accelerated during the 19th and early 20th centuries. Corinth's position on the isthmus once again proved advantageous for trade and transportation. The idea of constructing a canal through the isthmus, long imagined since ancient times, gained momentum in the modern era. Engineers, inspired by technological advancements and driven by economic ambition, began to seriously consider the feasibility of such a monumental project. The successful completion of the Corinth Canal would eventually transform regional and international shipping routes. But this belongs to the next chapter in Corinth's story. During the 19th century, the city focused on stabilizing its economy, improving agricultural productivity, and establishing commercial connections with neighboring towns and ports. Markets flourished as farmers, merchants, and artisans contributed to the region's economic recovery. The new town became a hub for trade in citrus fruits, grapes, olive oil, textiles, and handicrafts. Corinth also began to develop its civic institutions. Schools were established to educate the city's children, reflecting the new Greek state's commitment to literacy and national consciousness. Churches were built or restored, continuing Corinth's deep-rooted connection to Orthodox Christianity. Administrative buildings housed municipal authorities who oversaw local governance, taxation, public works, and legal matters. These developments reflected the city's integration into the structures of the modern Greek state. Social life in modern Corinth blended traditional practices with new influences. Residents celebrated national holidays, maintained local customs, and participated in church festivals that connected contemporary life with centuries-old religious traditions. At the same time, they embraced modern innovations, including newspapers, imported goods, and political ideas circulating through the broader Greek world. As Corinth moved fully into the modern age, the city's identity was shaped not only by economic development and political change, but also by a renewed fascination with its ancient past. The 19th and 20th centuries brought sweeping advancements in engineering, archaeology, transportation, and historical scholarship. These forces combined to transform Corinth into a place where ancient heritage, modern infrastructure, and national identity intersected. The Corinth that emerged in this era was both a thriving contemporary city and a living gateway to the deeper layers of Greek history. One of the most transformative achievements of modern Corinth was the creation of the Corinth Canal. The idea of cutting a channel through the narrow isthmus had existed for millennia. Leaders ranging from tyrants of ancient Corinth to emperors of Rome had considered such a project, recognizing that a canal would drastically shorten maritime routes between the Aegean and the Ionian seas. But the technological challenges of antiquity had always proven overwhelming. Only in the 19th century, with new engineering knowledge, modern machinery, and renewed national ambition, did the long-envisioned canal become a realistic undertaking. The construction of the Corinth Canal began under the newly established Greek state, reflecting the nation's desire to modernize and assert its presence in international trade. Engineers, architects, and laborers from various countries participated in the massive effort. The project required cutting deep through limestone, managing unstable rock formations, and designing channels capable of accommodating small and medium-sized ships. Though the work progressed with difficulty, and the engineering techniques continued to evolve as challenges emerged, the project steadily moved forward until completion. The opening of the Corinth Canal marked a turning point in regional commerce. Ships that once needed to circumnavigate the Peloponnese, a journey vulnerable to storms, piracy, and delays, could now pass directly through the isthmus in minutes. The canal did not rival the scale of other global waterways, yet its impact on Greek maritime traffic was profound. Corinth once again became a crossroads, linking distant ports in the eastern Mediterranean with harbors of the west. The canal also enhanced Corinth's symbolic status, connecting modern engineering achievements with the city's long history as a facilitator of trade. Even as the canal brought new economic opportunities, Corinth's ancient heritage gained increasing recognition. Archaeological exploration became one of the defining features of Corinth's modern story. Early travelers, scholars, and diplomats visiting the region marveled at the remnants of antiquity. The columns of the Temple of Apollo, the outlines of the ancient agora, the remnants of Roman buildings, and the imposing Acrocorinth rising above it all. These ruins hinted at the city's rich past and inspired formal archaeological efforts. Organized excavations began in the 19th century, led by both Greek and foreign institutions. Among the most influential contributors were teams from the American School of Classical Studies, whose systematic work transformed global understanding of ancient Corinth. Their discoveries revealed layers of history stretching across Greek, Roman, Byzantine, and medieval eras. Archaeologists uncovered temples, fountains, marketplaces, shops, fortifications, theaters, and homes, each offering insight into daily life, religious practices, political structures, and artistic expression. One of the most remarkable aspects of modern archaeological work in Corinth was the discovery of structures intimately connected to earlier historical narratives. The uncovering of the Periander fountain, long referenced in ancient literature, demonstrated the continuity of water management from classical to Roman times. Excavations near the bema, the platform where public speeches were delivered, evoked scenes from the city's classical past. Work in the Roman Forum revealed inscriptions, coins, and tools that provided evidence of Corinth's vibrant commercial life under Roman rule. Archaeology also illuminated the city's early Christian history. Excavations identified buildings associated with the Christian community and provided context for the writings of Paul. These discoveries connected Corinth's ancient past with global religious traditions, attracting pilgrims, scholars, and visitors from around the world. Through archaeology, Corinth became not only a symbol of Greek heritage, but also a site of international cultural significance. As excavations progressed, the ancient city became increasingly accessible to the public. Museums were established to house artifacts, including pottery, sculptures, mosaics, inscriptions, and everyday items. These collections allowed visitors to trace Corinth's evolution across centuries. The archaeological park, spread across the landscape near the modern town, offered a rare opportunity to walk through layers of history preserved in stone and earth. The Corinth, restored in parts and maintained as a protected site, provided visitors with panoramic views and tangible connections to the medieval and early modern eras. Modern Corinth itself continued to evolve alongside these archaeological developments. The coastal settlement established in the wake of Greek independence expanded into a bustling urban center, with new neighborhoods, schools, markets, and transportation networks. Infrastructure improvements, including roads, railways, and port facilities, reinforced Corinth's role as a regional hub. The city's population grew steadily, drawing residents from rural areas, nearby towns, and across Greece. Industrial development contributed to the local economy, while the service sector expanded to accommodate growing tourism. The 20th century brought both achievements and hardships. Earthquakes periodically damaged modern Corinth, most notably a devastating tremor in the later 20th century that destroyed buildings and required extensive reconstruction. Yet this natural disaster also demonstrated the city's resilience. Reconstruction efforts provided opportunities to modernize infrastructure, improve urban planning, and reinforce Corinth's position as a vital part of the national economy. Tourism became increasingly important as travelers from around the world sought to explore the ruins, walk the ancient streets, and gaze upon the canal. Visitors were drawn not only by Corinth's archaeological sites, but also by its proximity to other destinations in Greece, including Athens, Mycenae, and Epidaurus. Corinth thus emerged as both a gateway and a destination in its own right, offering ancient wonders, natural beauty, and modern comforts. Culturally, modern Corinth embraced its long history. Festivals celebrated Greek heritage and local traditions. Schools taught students about the city's ancient past and its role in shaping Greek identity. Scholars continued to analyze inscriptions, artifacts, and architectural remains, contributing to an ever-expanding body of knowledge. Local communities valued their connection to the city's storied legacy, incorporating it into literature, music, art, and civic pride. In the global imagination, Corinth occupies a special place. It is remembered as a powerful ancient polis, a center of craftsmanship and trade, a Roman administrative hub, a site of early Christian activity, a medieval fortress contested by empires, and a modern city that bridges past and present. The Corinth Canal stands as a symbol of human ingenuity, echoing ancient ambitions while serving contemporary needs. The archaeological ruins reveal a city that has been repeatedly reborn, each time transforming while retaining echoes of its earlier forms. Corinth's story, from mythic origins and classical glory to destruction, rebirth, and modern revival, embodies the broader history of Greece itself. It is a story of resilience, transformation, and enduring significance. As Corinth continues to grow and adapt in the modern era, its ancient foundations remain visible, reminding all who visit or study the city that its past is not forgotten, but woven into the fabric of its present.